Letter 41 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 41. Mr. Brand to John Harlowe, Esquire. Worthy Sir, my very good friend and patron, I arrived in town yesterday, after a tolerably pleasant journey, considering the hot weather and dusty roads. I put up at the Bull and Gate in Holborn, and hastened to Covent Garden. I soon found the house where the unhappy lady lodgeth, and in the back shop had a good deal of discourse with Mrs. Smith, her landlady, whom I found to be so highly prepossessed in her favour, that I saw it would not answer your desires to take my informations altogether from her, and being obliged to attend my patron, who, to my sorrow, miserum et aliena vivere quadra, I find wanteth much waiting upon, and is another sort of man than he was at college. For, Sir, inter nos, honours change manners. For the aforesaid causes, I thought it would best answer all the ends of the commission with which you honoured me, to engage, in the desired scrutiny, the wife of a particular friend, who liveth almost over against the house where she lodgeth, and who is a gentlewoman of character and sobriety, a mother of children, and one who knoweth the world well. To her I applied myself, therefore, and gave her a short history of the case, and desired she would very particularly inquire into the conduct of the unhappy young lady, her present way of life and subsistence, her visitors, her employments, and such like, for these, Sir, you know, are the things whereof you wish to be informed. Accordingly, Sir, I waited upon the gentlewoman aforesaid this day, and to my very great trouble, because I know it will be to yours, and likewise to all your worthy families, I must say that I do find things look a little more darkly than I hoped they would. For, alas, Sir, the gentlewoman's report turneth out not so favourable to Mrs. reputation as I wished, as you wished, and as every one of her friends wished. But so it is throughout the world, that one false step generally brings on another, and peradventure a worse, and a still worse, till the poor lined soul, a very fit epithet of the divine Quarleses, is quite entangled, and without infinite mercy lost for ever. It seemeth, Sir, she is notwithstanding in a very ill state of health, in this both gentlewomen, that is to say, Mrs. Smith, her landlady, and my friend's wife, agree. Yet she goeth often out in a chair to prayers, as it is said. But my friend's wife told me that nothing is more common in London than that the frequenting of the church at morning prayers is made the pretence and cover for private assignations. What a sad thing is this, that what was designed for wholesome nourishment to the poor soul should be turned into rank poison. But as Mr. Daniel Defoe, an ingenious man, though a dissenter, observeth, but indeed it is an old proverb, only I think he was the first that put it into verse, God never had a house of prayer, but Satan had a chapel there. Yet, to do the lady justice, nobody cometh home with her, nor indeed can they, because she goeth forward and backward in a sedan, or chair, as they call it. But then there's a gentleman of no good character, an intimado of Mr. Lovelace, who is a constant visitor of her, and of the people of the house, whom he regaleth and treateth, and hath of consequence their high good words. I have thereupon taken the trouble, for I love to be exact in any commission I undertake, to inquire particularly about this gentleman, as he is called, albeit I hold no man so but by his actions, for, as Juvenal saith, nobilitas sola est adque unica virtus. And this I did before I would sit down to write to you. His name is Belford. He hath a paternal estate of upwards of £1,000 by the year, and is now in mourning for an uncle who left him very considerably besides. He beareth a very profligate character as to women, for I inquired particularly about that, and is Mr. Lovelace's more especial privado, with whom he holdeth a regular correspondence, and hath been often seen with Miss tête-à-tête at the window, in no bad way indeed. But my friend's wife is of opinion that all is not as it should be. And indeed it is mighty strange to me, if Miss be so notable a penitent, as is represented, and if she have such an aversion to Mr. Lovelace, that she will admit his privado into her retirements, and see no other company. I understand from Mrs. Smith that Mr. Hickman was to see her some time ago from Miss Howe, and I am told by another hand You see, sir, how diligent I have been to execute the commissions you gave me, that he had no extraordinary opinion of this Belford at first, though they were seen together one morning by the opposite neighbour at breakfast, and another time this Belford was observed to watch Mr. Hickman's coming from her, so that, as it should seem, he was mighty zealous to ingratiate himself with Mr. Hickman, no doubt to engage him to make a favourable report to Miss Howe of the intimacy he was admitted into by her unhappy friend, who, as she is very ill, may mean no harm in allowing his visits. For he, it seemeth, brought to her, or recommended at least, the doctor and apothecary that attend her. But I think, upon the whole, it looketh not well. I am sorry, sir, I cannot give you a better account of the young lady's prudence. But what shall we say? Uvaque conspecta, livarum ducit ab uva, as Juvenal observeth. One thing I am afraid of, which is that Miss may be under necessities, and that this Belford, who, as Mrs. Smith owns, hath offered her money, which she, at the time, refused, may find an opportunity to take advantage of those necessities. And it is well observed by that poet, that agre formosam poteris servare puellam, nunc prece, nunc pretio forma petita ruit. And this Belford, who is a bold man, and hath, as they say, the look of one, may make good that of Horace, with whose writings you are so well acquainted, nobody better. Audax omnia perpeti, gens humana ruit per vetitum nefas. Forgive me, sir, for what I am going to write. But if you could prevail upon the rest of your family to join in the scheme which you and her virtuous sister, Miss Arabella, and the Archdeacon and I once talked of, which is to persuade the unhappy young lady to go in some creditable manner to some one of the foreign colonies, it might not save only her own credit and reputation, but the reputation and credit of all her family, and a great deal of vexation moreover. For it is my humble opinion, that you will hardly any of you enjoy yourselves while this once innocent young lady is in the way of being so frequently heard of by you, and this would put her out of the way, both of this Belford and of that Lovelace, and it might, peradventure, prevent as much evil as scandal. You will forgive me, sir, for this my plainness. Ovid pleadeth for me, adulator nullus amicus erit. And I have no view but that of approving myself a zealous well-wisher to all your worthy family, whereto I owe a great number of obligations, and very particularly, sir, your obliged and humble servant, Elias Brand. Wednesday, August 9. P.S. I shall give you further hints when I come down, which will be in a few days, and who my informants were, but by these you will see that I have been very assiduous, for the time, in the task you set me upon. The length of my letter you will excuse, for I need not tell you, sir, what narrative, complex, and conversation letters such a one as mine require. Every one to his talent. Letter-writing is mine, I will be bold to say, and that my correspondence was much coveted in the university, on that account by tyros and by sophs, when I was hardly a soph myself. But this I should not have taken upon myself to mention, but only in defence of the length of my letter. For nobody writeth shorter or pithier, when the subject requireth common forms only. But, in apologizing for my prolixity, I am adding to the fault, if it were one, which, however, I cannot think it to be, the subject considered. But this I have said before in other words. So, sir, if you will excuse my postscript, I am sure you will not find fault with my letter. One word more as to a matter of erudition, which you greatly love to hear me start and dwell upon. Dr. Lewen once, in your presence, as you, my good patron, cannot but remember, in a smartish kind of debate between him and me, took upon him to censure the parenthetical style, as I call it. He was a very learned and judicious man, to be sure, and an ornament to our function. But yet I must needs say, that it is a style which I greatly like, and the good doctor was then past his youth, and that time of life of consequence when a fertile imagination and a rich fancy pour in ideas so fast upon a writer, that parentheses are often wanted, and that for the sake of brevity as well as perspicuity, to save the reader the trouble of reading a passage more than once. Every man to his talent, as I said before. We are also apt to set up our natural biases for general standards, that I wondered the less at the worthy doctor's stiffness on this occasion. He smiled at me, you may remember, sir, and whether I was right or not, I am sure I smiled at him, and you, my worthy patron, as I had the satisfaction to observe, seemed to be of my party. But was it not strange that the old gentleman and I should so widely differ when the end with both, that is to say, perspicuity or clearness, was the same? But what shall we say? errare est hominis, sed non persistere. I think I have nothing to add until I have the honour of attending you in person. But I am, as above, etc., 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 E.B. End of Letter 41. Letter 42 of Clarissa Harlowe, or The History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or The History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 42. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Wednesday night, August 30th. It was lucky enough that our two servants met at Hannah's, which gave them so good an opportunity of exchanging their letters, time enough for each to return to his master early in the day. Thou dost well to boast of thy capacity for managing servants, and to set up for correcting our poets in their characters of this class of people, when, like a madman, thou canst beat their teeth out, and attempt to shoot them through the head, for not bringing to thee what they had no power to obtain. You well observe that you would have made a thorough-paced lawyer. The whole of the conversation piece between you and the Colonel affords a convincing proof that there is a black and white side to every cause. But what must the conscience of a partial whitener of his own cause, or blackener of another's, tell him, while he is throwing dust in the eyes of his judges, and all the time knows his own guilt? The Colonel, I see, is far from being a faultless man. But while he sought not to carry his point by breach of faith, he has an excuse which thou hast not. But with respect to him, and to us all, I can now, with a detestation of some of my own actions, see, that the taking advantage of another person's good opinion of us to injure, perhaps to ruin, that other, is the most ungenerous wickedness that can be committed. Man acting thus by man, we should not be at a loss to give such actions a name. But is it not doubly and trebly aggravated, when such advantage is taken of an unexperienced and innocent young creature, whom we pretend to love above all the women in the world, and when we seal our pretences by the most solemn vows and protestations of inviolable honour that we can invent? I see that this gentleman is the best match thou ever couldst have had, upon all accounts. His spirit such another impetuous one as thy own, soon taking fire, vindictive, and only differing in this, that the cause he engages in is a just one. But commend me to honest, brutal Mowbray, who, before he knew the cause, offers his sword in thy behalf against a man who had taken the injured side, and whom he had never seen before. As soon as I had run through your letters, and the copy of that of the incendiary brands, by the latter of which I saw to what cause a great deal of this last implacableness of the Harlowe family is owing, I took coach to Smith's, although I had been come from thence but about an hour, and had taken leave of the lady for the night. I sent up for Mrs. Lovick, and desired her, in the first place, to acquaint the lady, who was busied in her closet, that I had letters from Berks, in which I was informed that the interview between Colonel Morden and Mr. Lovelace had ended without ill consequences, that the Colonel intended to write to her very soon, and was interesting himself meanwhile in her favour, with her relations. That I hoped that this agreeable news would be means of giving her good rest, and I would wait upon her in the morning, by the time she should return from prayers, with all the particulars. She sent me word that she should be glad to see me in the morning, and was highly obliged to me for the good news I had sent her up. I then, in the back shop, read to Mrs. Lovick and to Mrs. Smith the copy of Brand's letter, and asked them if they could guess at the man's informant. They were not at a loss, Mrs. Smith having seen the same fellow Brand, who had talked with her, as I mentioned in the former, come out of a milliner's shop over against them, which milliner, she said, had also lately been very inquisitive about the lady. I wanted no further hint, but bidding them take no notice to the lady of what I had read, I shot over the way, and asking for the mistress of the house, she came to me. Retiring with her, at her invitation, into her parlour, I desired to know if she were acquainted with a young country clergyman of the name of Brand. She hesitatingly, seeing me in some emotion, owned that she had some small knowledge of the gentleman. Just then came in her husband, who is, it seems, a petty officer of excise, and not an ill-behaved man, who owned a fuller knowledge of him. I have the copy of a letter, said I, from this Brand, in which he has taken great liberties with my character, and with that of the most unblameable lady in the world, which he grounds upon information that you, madam, have given him. And then I read to them several passages in his letter, and asked what foundation she had for giving that fellow such impressions of either of us. They knew not what to answer, but at last said, that he had told them how wickedly the young lady had run away from her parents, what worthy and rich people they were, in what favour he stood with them, and that they had employed him to inquire after her behaviour, visitors, etc. They said, that indeed they knew very little of the young lady, but that, curse upon their censoriousness, it was but too natural to think that, where a lady had given way to a delusion, and taken so wrong a step, she would not stop there. That the most sacred places and things were but too often made cloaks for bad actions; that Mr. Brand had been informed, perhaps by some enemy of mine, that I was a man of very free principles, and an intimado, as he calls it, of the man who had ruined her; and that their cousin Barker, a manteau maker, who lodged up one pair of stairs, and who at their desire came down and confirmed what they said, had often from her window seen me with the lady in her chamber, and both talking very earnestly together; and that Mr. Brand, being unable to account for her admitting my visits, and knowing I was but a new acquaintance of hers, and an old one of Mr. Lovelace, thought himself obliged to lay these matters before her friends. This was the sum and substance of their tale. Oh, how I curse the censoriousness of this plaguy triumvirate! A parson, a milliner, and a mantua maker! The two latter not more by business led to adorn the persons, than generally by scandal to destroy the reputations of those they have a mind to exercise their talents upon. The two women took great pains to persuade me that they themselves were people of conscience. Of consequence, I told them, too much addicted, I feared, to censure other people who pretended not to their strictness; for that I had ever found censoriousness with those who affected to be thought more pious than their neighbours. They answered, that that was not their case, and that they had since inquired into the lady's character and manner of life, and were very much concerned to think any thing they had said should be made use of against her; and as they heard from Mrs. Smith that she was not likely to live long, they should be sorry she should go out of the world a sufferer by their means, or with an ill opinion of them, though strangers to her. The husband offered to write, if I pleased, to Mr. Brand in vindication of the lady; and the two women said they should be glad to wait upon her in person, to beg her pardon for any thing she had reason to take amiss from them, because they were now convinced that there was not such another young lady in the world. I told them, that the least said of the affair to the lady, in her present circumstances, was best; that she was a heavenly creature, and fond of taking all occasions to find excuses for her relations on their implacableness to her; that therefore I should take some notice to her of the uncharitable and weak surmises which gave birth to so vile a scandal; but that I would have him, Mr. Walton, for that is the husband's name, write to his acquaintance Brand as soon as possible, as he had offered; and so I left them. As to what thou sayest of thy charming cousin, let me know if thou hast any meaning in it. I have not the vanity to think myself deserving of such a lady as Miss Montague, and should not therefore care to expose myself to her scorn, and to thy derision. But were I assured I might avoid both of these, I would soon acquaint thee that I should think no pains nor assiduity too much to obtain a share in the good graces of such a lady. But I know thee too well to depend upon any thing thou sayest on this subject. Thou lovest to make thy friends the objects of ridicule to ladies, and imaginest from the vanity, and in this respect I will say littleness, of thine own heart, that thou shinest the brighter for the foil. Thus didst thou once play off the rough Mowbray with Miss Hatton, till the poor fellow knew not how to go either backward or forward. End of Letter 42. Letter 43 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8. By Samuel Richardson. Letter 43. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Thursday, 11 o'clock, August 31st. I am just come from the lady, whom I left cheerful and serene. She thanked me for my communication of the preceding night. I read to her such parts of your letters as I could read to her, and I thought it was a good test to distinguish the froth and whipt syllabub in them from the cream, in what one could and could not read to a woman of so fine a mind, since 4 parts out of 6 of thy letters, which I thought entertaining as I read them to myself, appeared to me, when I should have read them to her, most abominable stuff, and gave me a very contemptible idea of thy talents, and of my own judgment. She, as far from rejoicing as I had done at the disappointment her letter gave you when explained. She said she meant only an innocent allegory, which might carry instruction and warning to you when the meaning was taken, as well as answer her own hopes for the time. It was run off in a hurry. She was afraid it was not quite right in her, but hoped the end would excuse, if it could not justify, the means. And then she again expressed a good deal of apprehension, lest you should still take it into your head to molest her, when her time, she said, was so short, that she wanted every moment of it, repeating what she had once said before, that, when she wrote, she was so ill that she believed she should not have lived till now. If she had thought she should, she must have studied for an expedient that would have better answered her intentions, hinting at a removal out of the knowledge of us both. But she was much pleased at the conference between you and Colonel Morden, after 2 or 3 such violent sallies, as I acquainted her you had had between you, ended so amicably, and said she must absolutely depend upon the promise I had given her to use my utmost endeavours to prevent further mischief on her account. She was pleased with the justice you did her character to her cousin. She was glad to hear that he had so kind an opinion of her, and that he would write to her. I was under an unnecessary concern how to break to her that I had the copy of Brand's vile letter, Unnecessary, I say, for she took it just as you thought she would, as an excuse she wished to have for the implacableness of her friends, and begged I would let her read it herself. For, said she, the contents cannot disturb me, be they what they will. I gave it to her, and she read it to herself, a tear now and then being ready to start, and a sigh sometimes interposing. She gave me back the letter with great and surprising calmness, considering the subject. There was a time, said she, and that not long since, when such a letter as this would have greatly pained me. But I hope I have now got above all these things, and I can refer to your kind offices, and to those of Miss Howe, the justice that will be done to my memory among my friends. There is a good and a bad light in which every thing that befalls us may be taken. If the human mind will busy itself to make the worst of every disagreeable occurrence, it will never want woe. This letter, affecting as the subject of it is to my reputation, gives me more pleasure than pain, because I can gather from it that had not my friends been prepossessed by misinformed or rash and officious persons, who are always at hand to flatter or soothe the passions of the affluent, they could not have been so immovably determined against me. But now they are sufficiently cleared from every imputation of unforgivingness, for, while I appeared to them in the character of a vile hypocrite, pretending to true penitence, yet giving up myself to profligate courses, how could I expect either their pardon or blessing? But, madam, said I, you'll see by the date of this letter that their severity, previous to that, cannot be excused by it. It imports me much, replied she, on account of my present wishes, as to the office you are so kind to undertake, that you should not think harshly of my friends. I must own to you, that I have been apt sometimes myself to think them not only severe but cruel. Suffering minds will be partial to their own cause and merits. Knowing their own hearts, if sincere, they are apt to murmur when harshly treated. But if they are not believed to be innocent, by persons who have a right to decide upon their conduct according to their own judgments, how can it be helped? Besides, sir, how do you know that they are not about my friends as well-meaning misrepresenters as Mr. Brand really seems to be? But, be this as it will, there is no doubt that there are and have been multitudes of persons as innocent as myself, who have suffered upon surmises as little probable as those on which Mr. Brand founds his judgment. Your intimacy, sir, with Mr. Lovelace, and, may I say, a character which, it seems, you have been less solicitous formerly to justify than perhaps you will be for the future, and your frequent visits to me may well be thought to be questionable circumstances in my conduct. I could only admire her in silence. But you see, sir, proceeded she, how necessary it is for young people of our sex to be careful of our company, and how much, at the same time, it behoves young persons of yours to be chary of their own reputation, were it only for the sake of such of ours as they may mean honourably by, and who otherwise may suffer in their good names for being seen in their company. As to Mr. Brand, continued she, he is to be pitied. And let me enjoin you, Mr. Belford, not to take any resentments against him, which may be detrimental either to his person or his fortunes. Let his function and his good meaning plead for him. He will have concern enough when he finds every body whose displeasure I now labour under acquitting my memory of perverse guilt, and joining in a general pity for me. This, Lovelace, is the woman whose life thou hast curtailed in the blossom of it. How many opportunities must thou have had of admiring her inestimable worth, yet couldst have thy senses so much absorbed in the woman, in her charming person, as to be blind to the angel that shines out in such full glory in her mind? Indeed, I have ever thought myself, when blessed with her conversation, in the company of a real angel; and I am sure it would be impossible for me, were she to be as beautiful, and as crimsoned over with health, as I have seen her, to have the least thought of sex, when I heard her talk. Thursday, 3 o'clock, August 31. On my re-visit to the lady, I found her almost as much a sufferer from joy as she had sometimes been from grief; for she had just received a very kind letter from her cousin Morden, which she was so good as to communicate to me. As she had already begun to answer it, I begged leave to attend her in the evening, that I might not interrupt her in it. The letter is a very tender one; but, alas! all will be now too late; for the decree is certainly gone out. The world is unworthy of her. End of Letter 43. Letter 44 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 44. Colonel Morden to Miss Clarissa Harlowe, Tuesday, August 29th. I should not, my dearest cousin, have been a fortnight in England, without either doing myself the honour of waiting upon you in person, or of writing to you, if I had not been busying myself almost all the time in your service, in hopes of making my visit or letter still more acceptable to you; acceptable, as I have reason to presume either will be from the unquestionable love I ever bore you, and from the esteem you always honoured me with. Little did I think that so many days would have been required to effect my well intended purpose, where there used to be a love so ardent on one side, and where there still is, as I am thoroughly convinced, the most exalted merit on the other. I was yesterday with Mr. Lovelace and Lord M. I need not tell you, it seems, how very desirous the whole family, and all the relations of that nobleman are, of the honour of an alliance with you, nor how exceedingly earnest the ungrateful man is to make you all the reparation in his power. I think, my dear cousin, that you cannot now do better than to give him the honour of your hand. He says just and great things of your virtue, and so heartily condemns himself, that I think there is honourable room for you to forgive him, and the more room, as it seems you are determined against a legal prosecution. Your effectual forgiveness of Mr. Lovelace, it is evident to me, will accelerate a general reconciliation; for at present my other cousins cannot persuade themselves that he is in earnest to do you justice, or that you would refuse him if you believed he was. But, my dear cousin, there may possibly be something in this affair to which I may be a stranger. If there be, and you will acquaint me with it, all that a naturally warm heart can do in your behalf shall be done. I hope I shall be able, in my next visits to my several cousins, to set all right with them. Haughty spirits, when convinced that they have carried resentments too high, want but a good excuse to condescend; and parents must always love the child they once loved. But if I find them inflexible, I will set out and attend you without delay; for I long to see you after so many years' absence. Meanwhile, I beg the favour of a few lines, to know if you have reason to doubt Mr. Lovelace's sincerity. For my part, I can have none, if I am to judge from the conversation that passed between us yesterday in presence of Lord M. You will be pleased to direct for me at your uncle Antony's. Permit me, my dearest cousin, till I can procure happy reconciliation between you and your father, and brother, and uncles, to supply the place to you of all those near relations, as well as that of your affectionate kinsman and humble servant, William Morden. End of Letter 44. Letter 45 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 45. Miss Clarissa Harlowe to William Morden, Esq. Thursday, August 31st. I most heartily congratulate you, dear Sir, on your return to your native country. I heard with much pleasure that you were come, but I was both afraid and ashamed till you encouraged me by a first notice to address myself to you. How consoling is it to my wounded heart to find that you have not been carried away by that tide of resentment and displeasure with which I have been so unhappily overwhelmed; but that, while my still nearer relations have not thought fit to examine into the truth of vile reports raised against me, you have informed yourself of my innocence, and generously credited the information. I have not the least reason to doubt Mr. Lovelace's sincerity in his offers of marriage, nor that all his relations are heartily desirous of ranking me among them. I have had noble instances of their esteem for me, on the apprehending that my father's displeasure must have had absolutely refused their pressing solicitations in their kinsman's favour as well as his own. Nor think me, my dear cousin, blameable for refusing him. I had given Mr. Lovelace no reason to think me a weak creature. If I had, a man of his character might have thought himself warranted to endeavour to take ungenerous advantage of the weakness he had been able to inspire. The consciousness of my own weakness, in that case, might have brought me to a composition with his wickedness. I can indeed forgive him, but that is because I think his crimes have set me above him. Can I be above the man, Sir, to whom I shall give my hand and my vows, and with them a sanction to the most premeditated baseness? No, Sir, let me say, that your cousin Clarissa, were she likely to live many years, and that, if she married not this man, in penury or want, despised and forsaken by all her friends, puts not so high a value upon the conveniencies of life, nor upon life itself, as to seek to reobtain the one, or to preserve the other, by giving such a sanction which, were she to perform her duty, would reward the violator. Nor is it so much from pride as from principle that I say this. What, Sir, when virtue, when chastity, is the crown of a woman, and particularly of a wife, shall form an attempt upon hers but upon a presumption that she was capable of receiving his offered hand, when he had found himself mistaken in the vile opinion he had conceived of her? Hitherto he has not had reason to think me weak, nor will I give an instance so flagrant that weak I am in a point in which it would be criminal to be found weak. One day, Sir, you will perhaps know all my story; but whenever it is known, I beg that the author of my calamities may not be vindictively sought after. he could not have been the author of them but for a strange concurrence of unhappy causes. As the law will not be able to reach him when I am gone, the apprehension of any other sort of vengeance terrifies me. Since, in such a case, should my friends be safe, what honour would his death bring to my memory? If any of them should come to misfortune, how would my fault be aggravated? God long preserve you, my dearest cousin, and bless you but in proportion to the consolation you have given me in letting me know that you still love me, and that I have one near and dear relation who can pity and forgive me, and then you will be greatly blessed, is the prayer of your ever grateful and affectionate Clarissa Harlowe. End of letter 45. Letter 46 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 46. Mr. Lovelace to John Belford, Esquire, Thursday, August 31st. I cannot but own that I am cut to the heart by this Miss Harlowe's interpretation of her letter. She ought never to be forgiven. She, a meek person, and a penitent, and innocent, and pious, and I know not what, who can deceive with a foot in the grave. 'Tis evident that she sat down to write this letter with the design to mislead and deceive, and if she be capable of that, at such a crisis she has as much need of Heaven's forgiveness as I have of hers. And with all her cant of charity, if she be not more sure of it than I am of her real pardon, and if she take the thing in the light she ought to take it in, she will have a few darker moments yet to come than she seems to expect. Lord M. himself, who is not one of those, to speak in his own phrase, who can penetrate a millstone, sees the deceit, and thinks it unworthy of her, though my cousins Montague vindicate her. And no wonder this cursed partial sex, I hate 'em all, by my soul, I hate 'em all, will never allow any thing against an individual of it, where ours is concerned. And why? Because if they censure deceit in another, they must condemn their own hearts. She is to send me a letter after she is in heaven, is she? The devil take such allegories, and the devil take thee for calling this absurdity an innocent artifice. I insist upon it, that if a woman of her character at such a critical time is to be justified in such a deception, a man in full health and vigour of body and mind, as I am, may be excused for all his stratagems and attempts against her. And thank my stars, I can now sit me down with a quiet conscience on that score. By my soul, I can, Jack. Nor has any body who can acquit her a right to blame me. But with some, indeed, every thing she does must be good, every thing I do must be bad. And why? Because she has always taken care to coax the stupid misjudging world like a woman, while I have constantly defied and despised its censures like a man. But, notwithstanding all, you may let her know from me that I will not molest her, since my visits would be so shocking to her, and I hope she will take this into her consideration, as a piece of generosity which she could hardly expect after the deception she has put upon me. And let her further know, that if there be any thing in my power that will contribute either to her ease or honour, I will obey her at the very first intimation, however disgraceful or detrimental to myself. All this to make her unapprehensive, and that she may have nothing to pull her back. If her cursed relations could be brought as cheerfully to perform their parts, I'd answer life for her recovery. But who, that has so many ludicrous images raised in his mind by the awkward penitence, can forbear laughing at thee? Spare, I beseech thee, dear Belford, for the future, all thine own aspirations, if thou wouldst not dishonour those of an angel indeed. When I came to that passage, where thou sayest that thou considerest her as one sent from heaven to draw thee after her, for the heart of me, I could not for an hour put thee out of my head in the attitude of Dame Elizabeth Carteret on her monument in Westminster Abbey. If thou never observest it, go thither on purpose, and there wilt thou see this dame in effigy, with uplifted head and hand, the latter taken hold of by a Cupid every inch of stone, one clumsy foot lifted up also, aiming, as the sculptor designed it, to ascend, but so executed as would rather make one imagine that the figure, without shoe or stocking as it is, though the rest of the body is robed, was looking up to its corn-cutter, the other riveted to its native earth, bemired, like thee, immersed, thou callest it, beyond the possibility of unsticking itself. Both figures, thou wilt find, seem to be in a contention, the bigger whether it should pull down the lesser about its ears, the lesser, a chubby fat little varlet, of a fourth part of the other's bigness, with wings not much larger than those of a butterfly, whether it should raise the larger to a heaven it points to, hardly big enough to contain the great toes of either. Thou wilt say, perhaps, that the dame's figure and stone may do credit in the comparison to thine, both in grain and shape, wooden as thou art all over, but that the lady, who in every thing but in the trick she has played me so lately, is truly an angel, is but sorrily represented by the fat-flanked Cupid. This I allow thee. But yet there is enough in thy aspirations to strike my mind with the resemblance of thee and the lady to the figures on the wretched monument. For thou oughtest to remember, that, prepared as she may be to mount to her native skies, it is impossible for her to draw after her a heavy fellow who has so much to repent of as thou hast. But now, to be serious once more, let me tell you, Belford, that, if the lady be really so ill as you write she is, it will become you (no Roman style here) in a case so very affecting, to be a little less pointed and sarcastic in your reflections. For, upon my soul, the matter begins to grate me most confoundedly. I am now so impatient to hear often of her, that I take the hint accidentally given me by our two fellows meeting at Slough, and resolve to go to our friend Dolman's at Uxbridge, whose wife and sister, as well as he, have so frequently pressed me to give them my company for a week or two. There shall I be within 2 hours' ride, if any thing should happen to induce her to see me. For it will well become her piety and avowed charity, should the worst happen, the Lord of heaven and earth, however, avert that worst, to give me that pardon from her lips, which she has not denied to me by pen and ink. And as she wishes my reformation, she knows not what good effects such an interview may have upon me. I shall accordingly be at Dolman's to morrow morning by 11 at furthest. My fellow will find me there at his return from you, with a letter I hope. I shall have Joel with me likewise, that I may send thee oftener, as matters fall out. Were I to be still nearer, or in town, it would be impossible to withhold myself from seeing her. But, if the worst happen, as by your continual knelling I know not what to think of it, yet once more, Heaven avert that worst! How natural it is to pray, when once cannot help oneself! Then say not, in so many dreadful words, what the event is, only that you advise me to take a trip to Paris, and that will stab me to the heart. I so well approve of your generosity to poor Belton's sister, that I have made Mowbray give up his legacy, as I do mine, towards her India bonds. When I come to town, Tourville shall do the like, and we will buy each a ring to wear in memory of the honest fellow, with our own money, that we may perform his will as well as our own. My fellow rides the rest of the night. I charge you, Jack, if you would save his life, that you send him not back empty-handed. End of Letter 46. Letter 47 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 47. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Tuesday night, August 30th. When I concluded my last, I hoped that my next attendance upon this surprising lady would furnish me with some particulars as agreeable as now could be hoped for from the declining way she is in, by reason of the welcome letter she had received from her cousin Morden. But it proved quite otherwise to me, though not to herself; for I think I was never more shocked in my life than on the occasion I shall mention presently. When I attended her about 7 in the evening, she told me that she found herself in a very petulant way after I had left her. Strange, said she, that the pleasure I received from my cousin's letter should have such an effect upon me. But I could not help giving way to a comparative humour, as I may call it, and to think it very hard that my nearer relations did not take the methods which my cousin Morden kindly took, by inquiring into my merit or demerit, and giving my cause a fair audit before they proceeded to condemnation. She had hardly said this when she started, and a blush overspread her sweet face on hearing, as I also did, a sort of lumbering noise upon the stairs, as if a large trunk were bringing up between two people, and looking upon me with an eye of concern. Blunderers, said she, they have brought in something 2 hours before the time. Don't be surprised, sir. It is all to save you trouble. Before I could speak, in came Mrs. Smith. O madam, said she, what have you done? Mrs. Lovick, entering, made the same exclamation. Lord have mercy upon me, madam, cried I, what have you done? For she, stepping at the same instant to the door, the women told me it was a coffin. O Lovelace, that thou hadst been there at that moment! Thou, the causer of all these shocking scenes! Surely thou couldst not have been less affected than I, who have no guilt, as to her, to answer for. With an intrepidity of a piece with the preparation, having directed them to carry it to her bedchamber, she returned to us. They were not to have brought it in till after dark, said she. Pray excuse me, Mr. Belford, and don't you, Mrs. Lovick, be concerned, nor you, Mrs. Smith. Why should you? There is nothing more in it than the unusualness of the thing. Why, may we not be as reasonably shocked at going to church, where are the monuments of our ancestors, with whose dust we even hope our dust shall be one day mingled, as to be moved at such a sight as this? We all remaining silent, the women having their aprons at their eyes. Why this concern for nothing at all? Said she. If I am to be blamed for any thing, it is for showing too much solicitude, as it may be thought, for this earthly part. I love to do every thing for myself that I can do. I ever did. Every other material point is so far done and taken care of, that I have had leisure for things of lesser moment. Minutenesses may be observed, where greater articles are not neglected for them. I might have had this to order, perhaps, when less fit to order it. I have no mother, no sister, no Mrs. Norton, no Miss Howe near me. Some of you must have seen this in a few days, if not now. Perhaps have had the friendly trouble of directing it. And what is the difference of a few days to you, when I am gratified rather than discomposed by it? I shall not die the sooner for such a preparation. Should not every body that has any thing to bequeath make their will? And who that makes a will should be afraid of a coffin? My dear friends, to the women, I have considered these things. Do not, with such an object before you as you have had in me for weeks, give me reason to think you have not. How reasonable was all this! It showed, indeed, that she herself had well considered it. But yet we could not help being shocked at the thoughts of the coffin thus brought in, the lovely person before our eyes who is, in all likelihood, so soon to fill it. We were all silent still, the women in grief, I in a manner stunned. She would not ask me, she said, but would be glad, since it had thus earlier than she had intended been brought in, that her two good friends would walk in and look upon it. They would be less shocked when it was made more familiar to their eye. Don't you lead back, said she, a starting steed to the object he is apt to start at, in order to familiarize him to it, and cure his starting. The same reason will hold in this case. Come, my good friends, I will lead you in. I took my leave, telling her she had done wrong, very wrong, and ought not by any means to have such an object before her. The women followed her in. 'Tis a strange sex. Nothing is too shocking for them to look upon, or see acted, that has but novelty and curiosity in it. Down I posted, got a chair, and was carried home, extremely shocked and discomposed, yet, weighing the lady's arguments, I know not why I was so affected, except, as she said, at the unusualness of the thing. While I waited for a chair, Mrs. Smith came down, and told me that there were devices and inscriptions upon the lid. Lord bless me! Is a coffin a proper subject to display fancy upon? But these great minds cannot avoid doing extraordinary things. End of Letter 47. Letter 48 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 48. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Friday morning, September 1st. It is surprising that I, a man, should be so much affected as I was, at such an object as is the subject of my former letter, who also in my late uncle's case, and poor Belton's, had the like before me, and the directing of it, when she, a woman, of so weak and tender a frame, who was to fill it, so soon perhaps to fill it, could give orders about it, and draw out the devices upon it, and explain them with so little concern as the women tell me she did to them last night, after I was gone. I really was ill, and restless all night. Thou wert the subject of my execration, as she was of my admiration, all the time I was quite awake. And when I dozed, I dreamt of nothing but of flying hour-glasses, death's heads, spades, mattocks, and eternity, the hint of her devices, as given me by Mrs. Smith, running in my head. However, not being able to keep away from Smith's, I went thither about 7. The lady was just gone out. She had slept better, I found, than I, though her solemn repository was under her window, not far from her bedside. I was prevailed upon by Mrs. Smith and her nurse Shelburne, Mrs. Lovick being abroad with her, to go up and look at the devices. Mrs. Lovick has since shown me a copy of the draught by which all was ordered, and I will give thee a sketch of the symbols. The principal device, neatly edged on a plate of white metal, is a crowned serpent with its tail in its mouth, forming a ring, the emblem of eternity, and in the circle made by it is this inscription: Clarissa Harlowe, April 10, then the year, 8@19. 4 ornaments, at top an hour-glass winged, at bottom an urn. Under the hour-glass, on another plate, this inscription: Here the wicked cease from troubling, and here the weary be at rest. Job 3:17. Over the urn, near the bottom: Turn again unto thy rest, O my soul, for the Lord hath rewarded thee. And why? Thou hast delivered my soul from death, mine eyes from tears, and my feet from falling. Psalm 116, 7, 8. Over this is the head of a white lily, snapped short off, and just falling from the stalk, and this inscription over that, between the principal plate and the lily: The days of man are but as grass, for he flourisheth as a flower of the field. For as soon as the wind goeth over it, it is gone, and the place thereof shall know it no more. Psalm 103, 15, 16. She excused herself to the women on the score of her youth, and being used to draw for her needleworks, for having shown more fancy than would perhaps be thought suitable on so solemn an occasion. The date April 10th she accounted for, as not being able to tell what her closing day would be, and as that was the fatal day of her leaving her father's house. She discharged the undertaker's bill after I went away, with as much cheerfulness as she could ever have paid for the clothes she sold to purchase this her palace, for such she called it, reflecting upon herself for the expensiveness of it, saying, that they might observe in her that pride left not poor mortals to the last. But indeed she did not know but her father would permit it, when furnished, to be carried down to be deposited with her ancestors, and in that case she ought not to discredit those ancestors in her appearance amongst them. It is covered with fine black cloth, and lined with white satin, soon, she said, to be tarnished with viler earth than any it could be covered by. The burial dress was brought home with it. The women had curiosity enough, I suppose, to see her open that, if she did open it, and perhaps thou wouldst have been glad to have been present to have admired it too. Mrs. Lovick said, she took the liberty to blame her, and wished the removal of such an object, from her bed-chamber at least, and was so affected with the noble answer she made upon it, that she entered it down the moment she left her. To persons in health, said she, this sight may be shocking, and the preparation, and my unconcernedness in it, may appear affected. But to me, who have had so gradual a weaning time from the world, and so much reason not to love it, I must say, I dwell on, I indulge, and, strictly speaking, I enjoy, the thoughts of death. For believe me, looking steadfastly at the awful receptacle, believe what at this instant I feel to be most true, that there is such a vast superiority of weight and importance in the thought of death, and its hoped for happy consequences, that it in a manner annihilates all other considerations and concerns. Believe me, my good friends, it does what nothing else can do. It teaches me, by strengthening in me the force of the divinest example, to forgive the injuries I have received, and shuts out the remembrance of past evils from my soul. And now let me ask thee, Lovelace, dost thou think that, when the time shall come that thou shalt be obliged to launch into the boundless ocean of eternity, thou wilt be able, any more than poor Belton, to act thy part with such true heroism, as this sweet and tender blossom of a woman has manifested, and continues to manifest? Oh, no, it cannot be. And why can't it be? The reason is evident. She has no wilful errors to look back upon with self-reproach, and her mind is strengthened by the consolations which flow from that religious rectitude which has been the guide of all her actions, and which has taught her rather to choose to be a sufferer than an aggressor. This was the support of the divine Socrates, as thou hast read, when led to execution, his wife lamenting that he should suffer, being innocent. Thou fool, said he, wouldst thou wish me to be guilty? End of Letter 48. Letter 49 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 49. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Friday, September 1st. How astonishing, in the midst of such affecting scenes, is thy mirth on what thou callest my own aspirations! Never, surely, was there such another man in this world, thy talents and thy levity taken together. Surely what I shall send thee with this will affect thee. If not, nothing can, till thy own hour come, and heavy will then thy reflections be. I am glad, however, that thou enablest me to assure the lady that thou wilt no more molest her; that is to say, in other words, that, after having ruined her fortunes and all her worldly prospects, thou wilt be so gracious as to let her lie down and die in peace. By giving up to poor Belton's sister the little legacy, and thy undertaking to make Mowbray and Tourville follow thy example, are, I must say to thy honour, of a piece with thy generosity to thy Rosebud and her Johnny, and to a number of other good actions in pecuniary matters, although thy Rosebud's is, I believe, the only instance, where a pretty woman was concerned, of such a disinterested bounty. Upon my faith, Lovelace, I love to praise thee, and often, as thou knowest, have I studied for occasions to do it, insomuch that when, for the life of me, I could not think of any thing done by thee that deserved praise, I have taken pains to applaud the not ungraceful manner in which thou hast performed actions that merited the gallows. Now thou art so near, I will dispatch my servant to thee, if occasion requires. But I fear I shall soon give thee the news thou art apprehensive of: for I am just now sent for by Mrs. Smith, who has ordered the messenger to tell me that she knew not if the lady will be alive when I come. Friday, September 1, 2 o'clock, at Smith's. I could not close my letter in such an uncertainty as must have added to your impatience; for you have on several occasions convinced me that the suspense you love to give would be the greatest torment to you that you could receive. A common case with all aggressive and violent spirits, I believe. I will just mention then, your servant waiting here till I have written, that the lady has had 2 very severe fits, in the last of which, while she lay, they sent to the doctor and Mr. Goddard, who both advised that a messenger should be dispatched for me as her executor, being doubtful whether, if she had a third, it would not carry her off. She was tolerably recovered by the time I came; and the doctor made her promise before me, that while she was so weak, she would not attempt any more to go abroad; for by Mrs. Lovick's description, who attended her, the shortness of her breath, her extreme weakness, and the fervour of her devotions when at church, were contraries, which, pulling different ways, the soul aspiring, the body sinking, tore her tender frame in pieces. So much for the present. I shall detain Will no longer than just to beg that you will send me back this packet and the last. Your memory is so good that one's reading is all you ever give, or need to give, to any thing. And who but ourselves can make out our characters, were you inclined to let any body see what passes between us? If I cannot be obliged, I shall be tempted to withhold what I write, till I have time to take a copy of it. It may not be amiss to observe that Mr. Belford's solicitude to get back his letters was owing to his desire of fulfilling the lady's wishes, that he would furnish Miss Howe with materials to vindicate her memory. A letter from Miss Howe is just now brought by a particular messenger, who says he must carry back a few lines in return. But as the lady is just retired to lie down, the man is to call again by and by. End of Letter 49. Letter 50 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 50. Mr. Lovelace, to John Belford, Esq., Uxbridge, September 1st, 12 o'clock at night. I send you the papers with this. You must account to me honestly and fairly when I see you, for the earnestness with which you write for them. And then also will we talk about the contents of your last dispatch, and about some of your severe and unfriendly reflections. Meantime, whatever thou dost, don't let the wonderful creature leave us. Set before her the sin of her preparation, as if she thought she could depart when she pleased. She'll persuade herself at this rate that she has nothing to do when all is ready, but to lie down and go to sleep, and such a lively fancy as hers will make a reality of a jest at any time. A jest I call all that has passed between her and me. A mere jest to die for. Has not her triumph over me, from first to last, been infinitely greater than her sufferings from me? Would the sacred regard I have for her purity, even for her personal, as well as intellectual purity, permit, I could prove this as clear as the sun. Tell therefore the dear creature that she must not be wicked in her piety. There is a too much, as well as too little, even in righteousness. Perhaps she does not think of that. Oh, that she would have permitted my attendance as obligingly as she does of thine. The dear soul used to love humour. I remember the time that she knew how to smile at a piece of apropos humour. And let me tell thee, a smile upon the lips, or a sparkling in the eye, must have had its correspondent cheerfulness in a heart so sincere as hers. Tell the doctor I will make over all my possessions and all my reversions to him, if he will but prolong her life for 1 12-month to come. But for 1 12-month, Jack! He will lose all his reputation with me, and I shall treat him as Belton did his doctor, if he cannot do this for me, on so young a subject. But 19, Belford! 19 cannot so soon die of grief, if the doctor deserve that title, and so blooming and so fine a constitution as she had but 3 or 4 months ago. But what need the doctor to ask her leave to write to her friends? Could he not have done it without letting her know any thing of the matter? That was one of the likeliest means that could be thought of to bring some of them about her, since she is so desirous to see them. At least it would have induced them to send up her favourite Norton. But these plaguy solemn fellows are great traders in parade. they'll cram down your throat their poisonous drugs by wholesale, without asking you a question, and have the assurance to own it to be prescribing. But when they are to do good, they are to require your consent. How the dear creature's character rises in every line of thy letters! But it is owing to the uncommon occasions she has met with, that she blazes out upon us with such meridian lustre. How, but for those occasions, could her noble sentiments, her prudent consideration, her forgiving spirit, her exalted benevolence, and her equanimity, in view of the most shocking prospects, which set her in a light so superior to all her sex, and even to the philosophers of antiquity, have been manifested? I know thou wilt think I am going to claim some merit to myself for having given her such opportunities of signalizing her virtues. But I am not; for if I did, I must share that merit with her implacable relations, who would justly be entitled to 2/3 of it at least; and my soul disdains a partnership in any thing with such a family. But this I mention as an answer to thy reproaches, that I could be so little edified by perfections, to which, thou supposest, I was for so long together daily and hourly a personal witness, when, admirable as she was in all she said, and in all she did, occasion had not at that time ripened and called forth those amazing perfections which now astonish and confound me. Hence it is that I admire her more than ever, and that my love for her is less personal, as I may say, more intellectual, than ever I thought it could be to a woman. Hence also it is, that I am confident, would it please the fates to spare her, and make her mine, I could love her with a purity that would draw on my own future, as well as ensure her temporal happiness. And hence, by necessary consequence, shall I be the most miserable of all men, if I am deprived of her. Thou severely reflectest upon me for my levity, the Abbey instance in thine eye, I suppose. And I will be ingenious enough to own, that as thou seest not my heart, there may be passages in every one of my letters, which, the melancholy occasion considered, deserve thy most pointed rebukes. But, faith, Jack, thou art such a tragicomical mortal, with thy leaden aspirations at one time, and thy flying hour-glasses and dreaming terrors at another, that, as Prior says, what serious is, thou turn'st to farce. And it is impossible to keep within the bounds of decorum or gravity, when one reads what thou writest. But to restrain myself, for my constitutional gaiety was ready to run away with me again, I will repeat, I must ever repeat, that I am most egregiously affected with the circumstances of the case, and were this paragon actually to quit the world, should never enjoy myself 1 hour together, though I were to live to the age of Methusalem. Indeed, it is to this deep concern that my levity is owing. For I struggle, and try to buffet down my cruel reflections as they rise, and when I cannot, I am forced, as I have often said, to try to make myself laugh, that I may not cry. For one or other I must do. And is it not philosophy carried to the highest pitch, for a man to conquer such tumults of soul as I am sometimes agitated by, and in the very height of the storm to be able to quave out and horse laugh? Your Senecas, your Epictetuses, and the rest of your stoical tribe, with all their apathy nonsense, could not come up to this. They could forbear wry faces. Bodily pains they could well enough seem to support, and that was all. But the pangs of their own smitten down souls they could not laugh over, though they could at the follies of others. They read grave lectures, but they were grave. This high point of philosophy, to laugh and be merry in the midst of the most soul-harrowing woes, when the heart-strings are just bursting asunder, was reserved for thy Lovelace. There is something owing to constitution, I own, and that this is the laughing time of my life. For what a woe must that be, which for an hour together can mortify a man 6 or 27, in high blood and spirits, of a naturally gay disposition, who can sing, dance, and scribble, and take and give delight in them all? But then my grief, as my joy, is sharper pointed than most other men's; and like what Dolly Welby once told me, describing the parturient throes, if there were not lucid intervals, if they did not come and go, there would be no bearing them. After all, as I am so little distant from the dear creature, and as she is so very ill, I think I cannot excuse myself from making her one visit. Nevertheless, if I thought her so near, what word shall I use that my soul is not shocked at? And that she would be too much discomposed by a visit, I would not think of it. Yet how can I bear the recollection that, when she last went from me, her innocence so triumphant over my premeditated guilt, as was enough to reconcile her to life, and to set her above the sense of injury so nobly sustained, that she should then depart with an incurable fracture in her heart, and that should be the last time I should ever see her? How can I bear this reflection? O Jack, how my conscience, that gives edge even to thy blunt reflections, tears me! Even this moment would I give the world to push the cruel reproacher from me by one ray of my usual gaiety. Sick of myself! Sick of the remembrance of my vile plots, and of my light, my momentary ecstasy! Villanous burglar, felon, thief, that I was! which has brought on me such durable and such heavy remorse? What would I give that I had not been guilty of such barbarous and ungrateful perfidy to the most excellent of God's creatures? I would end, methinks, with one sprightlier line. But it will not be. Let me tell thee then, and rejoice at it, if thou wilt, that I am inexpressibly miserable. End of Letter 50. Letter 51 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 51. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esquire, Saturday morning, September 2nd. I have some little pleasure given me by thine, just now brought me. I see now that thou hast a little humanity left. Would to heaven, for the dear lady's sake, as well as for thy own, that thou hadst rummaged it up from all the dark forgotten corners of thy soul a little sooner. The lady is alive, and serene, and calm, and has all her noble intellects clear and strong. But 19 will not, however, save her. She says she will now content herself with her closet duties, and the visits of the parish minister, and will not attempt to go out. Nor indeed will she, I am afraid, ever walk up or down a pair of stairs again. I am sorry at my soul to have this to say, but it would be a folly to flatter thee. As to thy seeing her, I believe the least hint of that sort now would cut off some hours of her life. What has contributed to her serenity, it seems, is, that taking the alarm her fits gave her, she has entirely finished and signed and sealed her last will, which she had deferred till this time, in hopes, as she said, of some good news from Harlowe Place, which would have induced her to alter some passages in it. Miss Howe's letter was not given her till 4 in the afternoon yesterday, at which time the messenger returned for an answer. She admitted him into her presence in the dining-room, ill as she then was, and she would have written a few lines, as desired by Miss Howe, but not being able to hold a pen, she bid the messenger tell her that she hoped to be well enough to write a long letter by the next day's post, and would not now detain him. Saturday, 6 in the afternoon. I called just now, and found the lady writing to Miss Howe. She made me a melancholy compliment, that she showed me not Miss Howe's letter, because I should soon have that and all her papers before me. But she told me that Miss Howe had very considerably obviated to Colonel Morden several things which might have occasioned misapprehensions between him and me, and had likewise put a lighter construction, for the sake of peace, on some of your actions than they deserved. She added, that her cousin Morden was warmly engaged in her favour with her friends, and one good piece of news Miss Howe's letter contained, that her father would give up some matters which, appertaining to her of right, would make my executorship the easier in some particulars that had given her a little pain. She owned she had been obliged to leave off, in the letter she was writing, through weakness. Will says he shall reach you to night. I shall send in the morning, and if I find her not worse, will ride to Edgware, and return in the afternoon. End of Letter 51. Letter 52 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 52. Miss Howe to Miss Clarissa Harlowe, Tuesday, August 29th. My dearest friend, we are at length returned to our own home. I had intended to wait on you in London, but my mother is very ill. Alas, my dear, she is very ill indeed. And you are likewise very ill. I see that by yours of the 25th. What shall I do if I lose two such near and dear and tender friends? She was taken ill yesterday, at our last stage in our return home, and has a violent surfeit and fever, and the doctors are doubtful about her. If she should die, how will all my pertnesses to her fly in my face? Why did I ever vex her? She says I have been all duty and obedience. She kindly forgets all my faults, and remembers every thing I have been so happy as to oblige her in, and this cuts me to the heart. I see, my dear, that you are very bad, and I cannot bear it. Do, my beloved Miss Harlowe, if you can be better, do, for my sake, be better. And send me word of it. Let the bearer bring me a line. Be sure you send me a line. If I lose you, my more than sister, and lose my mother, I shall distrust my own conduct, and will not marry. And why should I? Creeping, cringing in courtship. Oh, my dear, these men are a vile race of reptiles in our day, and mere bears in their own.
see in Lovelace all that is desirable in figure, in birth, and in fortune, but in his heart a devil! See in Hickman Indeed, my dear, I cannot tell what any body can see in Hickman, to be always preaching in his favour. And is it to be expected that I, who could hardly bear controul from a mother, should take it from a husband? From one, too, who has neither more wit nor more understanding than myself? Yet he to be my instructor! So he will, I suppose, but more by the insolence of his will than by the merit of his counsel. It is in vain to think of it. I cannot be a wife to any man breathing whom I at present know. This I the rather mention now, because, on my mother's danger, I know you will be for pressing me the sooner to throw myself into another sort of protection, should I be deprived of her. But no more of this subject, or indeed of any other, for I am obliged to attend my mamma, who cannot bear me out of her sight. Wednesday, August 30th. My mother, heaven be praised, has had a fine night, and is much better. Her fever has yielded to medicine. And now I can write once more with freedom and ease to you, in hopes that you also are better. If this be granted to my prayers, I shall again be happy. I writhe with still the more alacrity, as I have an opportunity given me to touch upon a subject in which you are nearly concerned. You must know then, my dear, that your cousin Morden has been here with me. He told me of an interview he had on Monday at Lord M.'s with Lovelace, and asked me abundance of questions about you, and about that villanous man. I could have raised a fine flame between them if I would, but observing that he is a man of very lively passions, and believing you would be miserable if any thing should happen to him from a quarrel with a man who is known to have so many advantages at his sword, I made not the worst of the subjects we talked of. But as I could not tell untruths in his favour, you must think I said enough to make him curse the wretch. I don't find, well as they all used to respect Colonel Morden, that he has influence enough upon them to bring them to any terms of reconciliation. What can they mean by it? But your brother is come home, it seems. So the honour of the house, the reputation of the family, is all the cry. The Colonel is exceedingly out of humour with them all. Yet has he not hitherto, it seems, seen your brutal brother? I told him how ill you were, and communicated to him some of the contents of your letter. He admired you, cursed Lovelace, and raved against all your family. He declared that they were all unworthy of you. At his earnest request, I permitted him to take some brief notes of such of the contents of your letter to me as I thought I could read to him, and particularly of your melancholy conclusion. He says that none of your friends think you are so ill as you are, nor will believe it. He is sure they all love you, and that dearly too. If they do, their present hardness of heart will be the subject of everlasting remorse to them, should you be taken from us. But now, it seems, barbarous wretches, you are to suffer within an inch of your life. He asked me questions about Mr. Belford; and when he had heard what I had to say of that gentleman, and his disinterested services to you, he raved at some villanous surmises thrown out against you by that officious pedant Brand, who, but for his gown, I find, would come off poorly enough between your cousin and Lovelace. He was so uneasy about you himself, that on Thursday the 24th he sent up an honest serious man, one Alston, a gentleman farmer, to inquire of your condition, your visitors, and the like, who brought him word that he was very ill, and was put to great straits to support yourself; but as this was told him by the gentlewoman of the house where you lodge, who, it seems, mingled it with some tart, though deserved, reflections upon your relations' cruelty, it was not credited by them, and I myself hope it cannot be true. For surely you could not be so unjust, I will say, to my friendship, as to suffer any inconveniencies for want of money. I think I could not forgive you, if it was so. The Colonel, as one of your trustees, is resolved to see you put into possession of your estate; and in the mean time he has actually engaged them to remit to him, for you, the produce of it accrued since your grandfather's death, a very considerable sum, and proposes himself to attend you with it. But by a hint he dropped, I find you had disappointed some people's littleness by not writing to them for money and supplies, since they were determined to distress you, and to put you at defiance, like all the rest. I hope I may say that without offence. Your cousin imagines that before a reconciliation takes place, they will insist that you make such a will as to that estate as they shall approve of. But he declares that he will not go out of England till he has seen justice done you by every body, and that you shall not be imposed on either by friend or foe. By relation or foe, should he not have said? For a friend will not impose upon a friend. So, my dear, you are to buy your peace, if some people are to have their wills. Your cousin, not I, my dear, though it was always my opinion, says, that the whole family is too rich to be either humble, considerate, or contented; and as for himself, he has an ample fortune, he says, and thinks of leaving it wholly to you. Had this villain Lovelace consulted his worldly interests only, what a fortune would he have had in you, even although your marrying him had deprived you of a paternal share? I am obliged to leave off here; but having a good deal still more to write, and my mother better, I will pursue the subject in another letter, although I send both together. I need not say how much I am, and will ever be, your affectionate, etc.,
Anna Howe. End of Letter 52. Letter 53 of Clarissa Harlowe, or The History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or The History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 53. Miss Howe to Miss Clarissa Harlowe, Thursday, August 31st. The Colonel thought fit once, in praise of Lovelace's generosity, to say, that, as a man of honour ought, he took to himself all the blame, and acquitted you of the consequences of the precipitate step you had taken, since he said, as you loved him, and was in his power, he must have had advantages which he would not have had if you had continued at your father's or at any friend's. Mighty generous, I said, were it, as he supposed, in such insolent reflectors, the best of them, who pretend to clear reputations which never had been sullied but by falling into their dirty acquaintance. But in this case I averred, that there was no need of anything but the strictest truth to demonstrate Lovelace to be the blackest of villains, you the brightest of innocents. This he catched at, and swore, that if anything uncommon or barbarous in the seduction were to come out, as indeed one of the letters you had written to your friends, and which had been shown him, very strongly implied, that is to say, my dear, if anything worse than perjury, breach of faith, and abuse of a generous confidence were to appear, sorry fellows, he would avenge his cousin to the utmost. I urge your apprehensions on this head from your last letter to me, but he seemed capable of taking what I know to be real greatness of soul, in an unworthy sense, for he mentioned directly upon it the expectations your friends had, that you should, previous to any reconciliation with them, appear in a court of justice against the villain, if you could do it with the advantage to yourself that I hinted might be done. And truly, if I would have heard him, he had indelicacy enough to have gone into the nature of the proof of the crime upon which they wanted to have Lovelace arraigned. Yet this is a man improved by travel and learning. Upon my word, my dear, I, who have been accustomed to the most delicate conversation ever since I had the honour to know you, despise this sex, from the gentleman down to the peasant. Upon the whole, I find that Mr. Morden has a very slender notion of women's virtue in particular cases, for which reason I put him down, though your favourite, as one who is not entitled to cast the first stone. I never knew a man who deserved to be well thought of himself for his morals, who had a slight opinion of the virtue of our sex in general. For if, from the difference of temperament and education, modesty, chastity, and piety too, are not to be found in our sex preferably to the other, I should think it a sign of much worse nature in ours. He even hinted, as from your relations indeed, that it is impossible but there most be some will, where there is much love. These sort of reflections are enough to make a woman, who has at heart her own honour and the honour of her sex, to look about her, and consider what she is doing, when she enters into an intimacy with these wretches, since it is plain, that whenever she throws herself into the power of a man, and leaves for him her parents or guardians, everybody will believe it to be owing more to her good luck than to her discretion, if there be not an end of her virtue. And let the man be ever such a villain to her, she must take into her own bosom a share of his guilty baseness. I am writing to general cases. You, my dear, are out of the question. Your story, as I have heretofore said, will afford a warning as well as an example. For who is it that will not infer, that if a person of your fortune, character, and merit, could not escape ruin, after she had put herself into the power of her hyena, what can a thoughtless, fond, giddy creature expect? Every man, they will say, is not a Lovelace. True. But then neither is every woman a Clarissa. And allow for the one, and for the other, the example must be of general use. I prepared Mr. Morden to expect your appointment of Mr. Belford for an office that we both hope he will have no occasion to act in, nor any body else, for many, very many years to come. He was at first startled at it, but upon hearing such of your reasons as had satisfied me, he only said that such an appointment, were it to take place, would exceedingly affect his other cousins. He told me he had a copy of Lovelace's letter to you, imploring your pardon, and offering to undergo any penance to procure it, and also of your answer to it. I find he is willing to hope that a marriage between you may still take place, which he says will heal up all breaches. I would have written much more, on the following particulars especially, to wit, of the wretched man's hunting you out of your lodgings, of your relation's strange implacableness, I am in haste and cannot think of a word you would like better just now, of your last letter to Lovelace, to divert him from pursuing you, of your Aunt Hervey's penitential conversation with Mrs. Norton, of Mr. Wyerley's renewed address, of your lessons to me, in Hickman's behalf, so approvable, were the man more so than he is. But indeed I am offended with him at this instant, and have been for these 2 days. Of your sister's transportation project, and of 20 other things,
but am obliged to leave off to attend my 2 cousins Spilsworth and my cousin Herbert, who are come to visit us on account of my mother's illness. I will therefore dispatch these by Rogers; and if my mother gets well soon, as I hope she will, I am resolved to see you in town, and tell you every thing that now is upon my mind, and particularly, mingling my soul with yours, how much I am and will ever be, my dearest, dear friend, your affectionate Anna Howe. Let Rogers bring 1 line, I pray you. I thought to have sent him this afternoon, but he cannot set out till to-morrow morning early. I cannot express how much your staggering lines and your conclusion affect me. End of Letter 53.
Letter 54 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. Letter 54. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esquire, Sunday evening, September 3rd. I wonder not at the impatience your servant tells me you express to hear from me. I was designing to write you a long letter, and was just returned from Smith's for that purpose. But since you are urgent, you must be contented with a short one. I attended the lady this morning, just before I set out for Edgware. She was so ill overnight, that she was obliged to leave unfinished her letter to Miss Howe. But early this morning she made an end of it, and just sealed it up as I came. She was so fatigued with writing that she told me she would lie down after I was gone, and endeavour to recruit her spirits. They had sent for Mr. Goddard when she was so ill last night, and not being able to see him out of her own chamber, he, for the first time, saw her house, as she calls it. He was extremely shocked and concerned at it, and chid Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Lovick for not persuading her to have such an object removed from her bedchamber. And when they excused themselves, on the little authority it was reasonable to suppose they must have, with a lady so much their superior, he reflected warmly on those who had more authority, and who left her to proceed with such a shocking and solemn whimsy, as he called it. It is placed near the window, like a harpsichord, though covered over to the ground. And when she is so ill that she cannot well go to her closet, she writes and reads upon it, as others would upon a desk or table. But, only as she was so ill last night, she chooses not to see any body in that apartment. I went to Edgware, and, returning in the evening, attended her again. She had a letter brought her from Mrs. Norton, a long one, as it seems by its bulk, just before I came. But she had not opened it, and said, that as she was pretty calm and composed, she was afraid to look into the contents, lest she should be ruffled, expecting now to hear of nothing that could do her good or give her pleasure from that good woman's dear hard-hearted neighbours, as she called her own relations. Seeing her so weak and ill, I withdrew, nor did she desire me to tarry, as sometimes she does, when I make a motion to depart. I had some hints, as I went away, from Mrs. Smith, that she had appropriated that evening to some offices that were to save trouble, as she called it, after her departure, and had been giving orders to her nurse and to Mrs. Lovick and Mrs. Smith about what she would have done when she was gone, and I believe they were of a very delicate and affecting nature. But Mrs. Smith descended not to particulars. The doctor had been with her, as well as Mr. Goddard, and they both joined with great earnestness to persuade her to have her house removed out of her sight. But she assured them that it gave her pleasure and spirits, and, being a necessary preparation, she wondered they should be surprised at it, when she had not any of her family about her, or any old acquaintance, on whose care and exactness in these punctilios, as she called them, she could rely. The doctor told Mrs. Smith that he believed she would hold out long enough for any of her friends to have notice of her state, and to see her, and hardly longer. And since he could not find that she had any certainty in her cousin Morden, which made it plain that her relations continued inflexible, he would go home and write a letter to her father, take it as she would. She had spent great part of the day in intense devotions, and to-morrow morning she is to have with her the same clergyman who has often attended her, from whose hand she will again receive the sacrament. Thou seest, Lovelace, that all is preparing, that all will be ready, and I am to attend her to-morrow afternoon, to take some instructions from her in relation to my part in the office to be performed for her. And thus, omitting the particulars of a fine conversation between her and Mrs. Lovick, which the latter acquainted me with, as well as another between her and the doctor and apothecary, which I had a design this evening to give you, they being of a very affecting nature, I have yielded to your impatience. I shall dispatch Harry to-morrow morning early with her letter to Miss Howe, an offer she took very kindly, as she is extremely solicitous to lessen that young lady's apprehensions for her on not hearing from her by Saturday's post, And yet, if she write truth, as no doubt but she will, how can her apprehensions be lessened? End of Letter 54. Letter 55 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 55. Miss Clarissa Harlowe, to Miss Howe, Saturday, September 2nd. I write, my beloved Miss Howe, though very ill still, but I could not by the return of your messenger, for I was then unable to hold a pen. Your mother's illness, as mentioned in the first part of your letter, gave me great distress for you, till I read further. You bewailed it as became a daughter so sensible. May you be blessed in each other for many, very many years to come. I doubt not that even this sudden and grievous indisposition, by the frame it has put you in, and the apprehension it has given you of losing so dear a mother, will contribute to the happiness I wish you. For, alas, my dear, we seldom know how to value the blessings we enjoy, till we are in danger of losing them, or have actually lost them. And then, what would we give to have them restored to us? What, I wonder, has again happened between you and Mr. Hickman? Although I know not, I dare say it is owing to some petty petulance, to some half ungenerous advantage taken of his obligingness and assiduity. Will you never, my dear, give the weight you and all our sex ought to give to the qualities of sobriety and regularity of life and manners in that sex? Must bold creatures and forward spirits for ever, and by the best and wisest of us, as well as by the indiscreetest, be the most kindly treated? My dear friends know not that I have actually suffered within less than an inch of my life. Poor Mr. Brand! He meant well, I believe. I am afraid all will turn heavily upon him, when he probably imagined that he was taking the best method to oblige. But were he not to have been so light of belief, and so weakly officious, and had given a more favourable, and, it would be strange if I could not say, a juster report, things would have been, nevertheless, exactly as they are. I must lay down my pen. I am very ill. I believe I shall be better by and by. The bad writing would betray me, although I had a mind to keep from you what the event must soon. Now I resume my trembling pen. Excuse the unsteady writing. It will be so. I have wanted no money, so don't be angry about such a trifle as money. Yet I am glad of what you incline me to hope, that my friends will give up the produce of my grandfather's estate, since it has been in their hands; because, knowing it to be my right, and that they could not want it, I have already disposed of a good part of it, and could only hope they would be willing to give it up at my last request. And now how rich shall I think myself in this my last stage! And yet I did not want before. Indeed I did not. For who, that has many superfluities, can be said to want? Do not, my dear friend, be concerned that I call it my last stage. For what is even the long life which in high health we wish for? What but, as we go along, a life of apprehension, sometimes for our friends, oftener for ourselves? And at last, when arrived at the old age we covet, one heavy loss or deprivation having succeeded another, we see ourselves stripped, as I may say, of every one we loved, and find ourselves exposed, as uncompanionable poor creatures, to the slights, to the contempts of jostling youth, who want to push us off the stage, in hopes to possess what we have; and, superadded to all, our own infirmities every day increasing, of themselves enough to make the life we wished for the greatest disease of all. Don't you remember the lines of Howard, which once you read to me in my ivy bower? These are the lines the lady refers to. From death we rose to life, 'tis but the same, through life to pass again from whence we came. With shame we see our passions can prevail, where reason, certainty, and virtue fail. Honour, that empty name, can death despise. Scorned love to death, as to a refuge, flies, and sorrow waits for death with longing eyes. Hope triumphs o'er the thoughts of death, and fate cheats fools and flatters the unfortunate. We fear to lose what a small time must waste, till life itself grows the disease at last. Begging for life, we beg for more decay, and to be long a-dying only pray. In the disposition of what belongs to me, I have endeavoured to do every thing in the justest and best manner I could think of, putting myself in my relations' places, and in the greater points, ordering my matters as if no misunderstanding had happened. I hope they will not think much of some bequests where wanted, and where due from my gratitude. But if they should, what is done, and I cannot now help it. Yet I must repeat, that I hope I have pleased every one of them. For I would not on any account have it thought that, in my last disposition, any thing undaughterly, unsisterly, or unlike a kinswoman, should have had place in a mind that is a truly free, as I will presume to say, from all resentment, that it now overflows with gratitude and blessings for the good I have received, although it be not all that my heart wished to receive. Were it even an hardship that I was not favoured with more, what is it but an hardship of half a year, against the most indulgent goodness of 18 years and an half that ever was shown to a daughter? My cousin, you tell me, thinks I was off my guard, and that I was taken at some advantage. Indeed, my dear, I was not. Indeed, I gave no room for advantage to be taken of me. I hope one day that will be seen, if I have the justice done me which Mr. Belford assures me of. I should hope that my cousin has not taken the liberties which you, by an observation not in general unjust, seem to charge him with. For it is sad to think that the generality of that sex should make so light of crimes, which they justly hold so unpardonable, in their own most intimate relations of ours, yet cannot commit them without doing such injuries to other families as they think themselves obliged to resent unto death, when offered to their own. But we women are too often to blame on this head, since the most virtuous among us seldom make virtue the test of their approbation of the other sex, insomuch that a man may glory in his wickedness of this sort without being rejected on that account, even to the faces of women of unquestionable virtue. Hence it is, that a libertine seldom thinks himself concerned so much as to save appearances. And what is it not that our sex suffers in their opinion on this very score? And what have I, more than many others, to answer for on this account in the world's eye? May my story be a warning to all, how they prefer a libertine to a man of true honour, and how they permit themselves to be misled, where they mean the best, by the specious yet foolish hope of subduing riveted habits, and, as I may say, of altering natures. The more foolish, as constant experience might convince us, that there is hardly 1 in 10 of even tolerably happy marriages, in which the wife keeps the hold in the husband's affections, which she had in the lover's. What influence then can she hope to have over the morals of an avowed libertine, who marries perhaps for conveniency, who despises the tie, and whom, it is too probable, nothing but old age, or sickness, or disease, the consequence of ruinous riot, can reclaim? I am very glad you gave my cousin... Sunday morning, September 3rd, 6 o'clock. Hither I had written, and was forced to quit my pen; and so much weaker and worse I grew, that had I resumed it, to have closed here, it must have been with such trembling unsteadiness, that it would have given you more concern for me, than the delay of sending it away by last night's post can do. I deferred it, therefore, to see how it would please God to deal with me; and I find myself, after a better night than I expected, lively and clear, and hope to give a proof that I do, in the continuation of my letter, which I will pursue as currently as if I had not left off. I am glad that you so considerately gave my cousin Morden favourable impressions of Mr. Belford, since otherwise some misunderstanding might have happened between them. For although I hope this Mr. Belford is an altered man, and in time will be a reformed one, yet is he one of those high spirits that has been accustomed to resent imaginary indignities to himself when, I believe, he has not been studious to avoid giving real offences to others, men of this cast acting as if they thought all the world was made to bar with them, and they with nobody in it. Mr. Lovelace, you tell me, thought fit to entrust my cousin with the copy of his letter of penitence to me, and with my answer to it, rejecting him and his suit. And Mr. Belford moreover acquaints me how much concerned Mr. Lovelace is for his baseness, and how freely he accused himself to my cousin. This shows that the true bravery of spirit is to be above doing a vile action, and that nothing subjects the human mind to so much meanness as the consciousness of having done wilful wrong to our fellow creatures. How low, how sordid, are the submissions which elaborate baseness compels, that wretch could treat me as he did, and then could so poorly creep to me for forgiveness of crimes so wilful, so black, and so premeditated. How my soul despised him for his meanness on a certain occasion, of which you will one day be informed. And him whose actions one's heart despises, it is far from being difficult to reject, had one ever so partially favoured him once. Meaning his meditated second violence, and his succeeding letters to her, supplicating for her pardon. Yet am I glad this violent spirit can thus creep, that like a poisonous serpent he can thus coil himself, and hide his head in his own narrow circlets, because this stooping, this abasement, gives me hope that no further mischief will ensue. All my apprehension is, what may happen when I am gone, lest then my cousin, or any other of my family, should endeavour to avenge me, and risk their own more precious lives on that account. If that part of Cain's curse were Mr. Lovelace's, to be a fugitive and vagabond in the earth, that is to say, if it meant no more harm to him than that he should be obliged to travel, as it seems he intends, though I wish him no ill in his travels, and I could know it, then should I be easy in the hoped for safety of my friends from his skilful violence. Oh, that I could hear he was 1,000 miles off! When I began this letter, I did not think I could have run to such a length. But 'tis to you, my dearest friend, and you have a title to the spirits you raise and support, for they are no longer mine, and will subside the moment I cease writing to you. But what do you bid me hope for, when you tell me that, if your mother's health will permit, you will see me in town? I hope your mother's health will be perfected as you wish, but I dare not promise myself so great a favour, so great a blessing I will call it, and indeed I know not if I should be able to bear it now. Yet one comfort it is in your power to give me, and that is, let me know, and very speedily it must be, if you wish to oblige me, that all matters are made up between you and Mr. Hickman, to whom I see you are resolved, with all your bravery of spirit, to owe a multitude of obligations for his patience with your flightiness. Think of this, my dear proud friend, and think likewise of what I have often told you, that pride in man or woman is an extreme that hardly ever fails, sooner or later, to bring forth its mortifying contrary. May you, my dear Miss Howe, have no discomforts but what you make to yourself, as it will be in your own power to lessen such as these. They ought to be your punishment if you do not. There is no such thing as perfect happiness here, since the busy mind will make to itself evils, were it to find none. You will therefore pardon this limited wish, strange as it may appear, till you consider it. For to wish you no infelicity, either within or without you, were to wish you what can never happen in this world, and what perhaps ought not to be wished for, if by a wish one could give one's friend such an exemption, since we are not to live here always. We must not, in short, expect that our roses will grow without thorns, but then they are useful and instructive thorns, which, by pricking the fingers of the too hasty plucker, teach future caution. And who knows not that difficulty gives poignancy to our enjoyments, which are apt to lose their relish with us when they are over easily obtained? I must conclude. God for ever bless you, and all you love and honour, and reward you here and hereafter for your kindness to your ever obliged and affectionate Clarissa Harlowe. End of Letter 55. Letter 56 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 56. Mrs. Norton to Miss Clarissa Harlowe. Thursday, August 31st. I had written sooner, my dearest young lady, but that I have been endeavouring, ever since the receipt of your last letter, to obtain a private audience of your mother, in hopes of leave to communicate it to her. But last night I was surprised by an invitation to breakfast at Harlowe Place this morning, and the chariot came early to fetch me, an honour I did not expect. When I came, I found there was to be a meeting of all your family with Colonel Morden, at Harlowe Place, and it was proposed by your mother, and consented to, that I should be present. Your cousin, I understand, had with difficulty brought this meeting to bear, for your brother had before industriously avoided all conversation with him on the affecting subject, urging that it was not necessary to talk to Mr. Morden upon it, who, being a remoter relation than themselves, had no business to make himself a judge of their conduct to their daughter, their niece, and their sister, especially as he had declared himself in her favour, adding, that he should hardly have patience to be questioned by Mr. Morden on that head. I was in hopes that your mother would have given me an opportunity of talking with her alone before the company met, but she seemed studiously to avoid it. I dare say, however, not with her inclination. I was ordered in just before Mr. Morden came, and was bid to sit down, which I did in the window. The Colonel, when he came, began the discourse by renewing, as he called it, his solicitations in your favour. He set before them your penitence, your ill health, your virtue, though once betrayed and basely used. He then read to them Mr. Lovelace's letter, a most contrite one indeed, and your high-souled answer, for that was what he justly called it, and he treated, as it deserved, Mr. Brand's officious information, of which I had before heard he had made them ashamed, by representations founded upon inquiries made by Mr. Alston, whom he had procured to go up on purpose to acquaint himself with your manner of life, and what was meant by the visits of that Mr. Belford. He then told them that he had the day before waited upon Miss Howe, and had been shown a letter from you to her, and permitted to take some memorandums from it, in which you appeared both by handwriting and the contents to be so very ill that it seemed doubtful to him if it were possible for you to get over it. And when he read to them that passage, where you ask Miss Howe, what can be done for you now, were your friends to be ever so favourable, and wish for their sakes more than for your own, that they would still relent, and then say, you are very ill, you must drop your pen, and ask excuse for your crooked writing, and take, as it were, a last farewell of Miss Howe. Adieu, my dear, adieu, are your words. O my child, said your mamma, weeping and clasping her hands. Dear madam, said your brother, be so good as to think you have more children than this ungrateful one. Yet your sister seemed affected. Your uncle Harlowe, wiping his eyes, O cousin, said he, if one thought the poor girl was really so ill. She must, said your uncle Antony. This is written to her private friend. God forbid she should be quite lost. Your uncle Harlowe wished they did not carry their resentments too far. I begged, for God's sake, wringing my hands, and with a bended knee, that they would permit me to go up to you, engaging to give them a faithful account of the way you were in. But I was chidden by your brother, and this occasioned some angry words between him and Mr. Morden. I believe, sir, I believe, madam, said your sister to her father and mother, we need not trouble my cousin to read any more. It does but grieve and disturb you. My sister Clary seems to be ill. I think if Mrs. Norton were permitted to go up to her, it would be right, wickedly as she has acted, if she be truly penitent. Here she stopped, and every one being silent, I stood up once more, and besought them to let me go. And then I offered to read a passage or two in your letter to me of the 24th, but I was taken up again by your brother, and this occasioned still higher words between the Colonel and him. Your mother, hoping to gain upon your inflexible brother, and to divert the anger of the two gentlemen from each other, proposed that the Colonel should proceed in reading the minutes he had taken from your letter. He accordingly read of your resuming your pen, that you thought you had taken your last farewell, and the rest of that very affecting passage, in which you are obliged to break off more than once, and afterwards to take an airing in a chair. Your brother and sister were affected at this, and he had recourse to his snuff-box, and where you comfort Miss Howe and say, you shall be happy. It is more, said he, than she will let any body else be. Your sister called you sweet soul, but with a low voice, then grew hard-hearted again. She said, nobody could help being affected by your pathetic grief, but that it was your talent. The Colonel then went on to the good effect your airing had upon you, to your good wishes to Miss Howe and Mr. Hickman, and to your concluding sentence, that when the happy life you wish to her comes to be wound up, she may be as calm and as easy at quitting it, as you hope in God you shall be. Your mother could not stand this, but retired to a corner of the room, and sobbed and wept. Your father for a few minutes could not speak, though he seemed inclined to say something. Your uncles were also both affected, but your brother went round to each, and again reminded your mother that she had other children. What was there, he said, in what was read, but the result of the talent you had of moving the passions? And he blamed them for choosing to hear read what they knew their abused indulgence could not be a proof against. This set Mr. Morden up again. Fie upon you, cousin Harlowe, said he. I see plainly to whom it is owing, that all relationship and ties of blood, with regard to this sweet sufferer, are laid aside. Such rigours as these make it difficult for a sliding virtue ever to recover itself. Your brother pretended the honour of the family, and declared that no child ought to be forgiven who abandoned the most indulgent of parents against warning, against the light of knowledge, as you had done. But, sir, and ladies, said I, rising from the seat in the window, and humbly turning round to each, if I may be permitted to speak, my dear Miss asks only for a blessing. She does not beg to be received to favour. She is very ill, and asks only for a last blessing. Come, come, good Norton. I need not tell you who said this. You are up again with your lamentables. A good woman as you are, to forgive so readily a crime, that has been as disgraceful to your part in her education as to her family, it is a weakness that would induce one to suspect your virtue, if you were to be encountered by a temptation properly adapted. By some such charitable logic, said Mr. Morden, as this, is my cousin Arabella captivated, I doubt not, if virtue, you, Mr. James Harlowe, are the most virtuous young man in the world. I knew how it would be, replied your brother, in a passion, if I met Mr. Morden upon this business. I would have declined it. But you, sir, to his father, would not permit me to do so. But, sir, turning to the Colonel, in no other presence. Then, cousin James, interrupted the other gentleman, that which is your protection, it seems, is mine. I am not used to bear defiances thus. You are my cousin, sir, and the son and nephew of persons as dear as near to me. There he paused. Are we, said your father, to be made still more unhappy among ourselves, when the villain lives that ought to be the object of every one's resentment, who has either a value for the family or for this ungrateful girl? That's the man, said your cousin, whom last Monday, as you know, I went purposely to make the object of mine. But what could I say, when I found him so willing to repair his crime? And I give it as my opinion, and have written accordingly to my poor cousin, that it is best for all round that his offer should be accepted. And let me tell you— Tell me nothing, said your father, quite enraged, or that very vile fellow. I have a riveted hatred to him. I would rather see the rebel die 100 deaths, were it possible, than that she should give such a villain as him a relation to my family. Well, but there's no room to think, said your mother, that she will give us such a relation, my dear. The poor girl will lessen, I fear, the number of our relations, not increase it. If she be so ill as we are told she is, let us send Mrs. Norton up to her. That's the least we can do. Let us take her, however, out of the hands of that Belford. Both your uncles supported this motion, the latter part of it especially. Your brother observed, in his ill-natured way, what a fine piece of consistency it was in you to refuse the vile injurer, and the amends he offered, yet to throw yourself upon the protection of his fast friend. Miss Harlowe was apprehensive, she said, that you would leave all you could leave to that pert creature Miss Howe, so she called her, if you should die. Oh, do not suppose that, my Bella, said your poor mother. I cannot think of parting with my Clary. With all her faults, she is my child. Her reasons for her conduct are not heard. It would break my heart to lose her. I think, my dear, to your father, none so fit as I to go up, if you will give me leave, and Mrs. Norton shall accompany me. This was a sweet motion, and your father paused upon it. Mr. Morden offered his service to escort her. Your uncle seemed to approve of it, but your brother dashed all. I hope, sir, said he to his father, I hope, madam, to his mother, that you will not endeavour to recover a faulty daughter by losing an unculpable son. I do declare that if ever my sister Clary darkens these doors again, I never will. I will set out, madam, the same hour you go to London, on such an errand, to Edinburgh, and there I will reside, and try to forget that I have relations in England, so near and so dear as you are now all to me. Good God, said the Colonel, what a declaration is this! And suppose, sir, and suppose, madam, turning to your father and mother, this should be the case, whether it is better, think you, that you should lose for ever such a daughter as my cousin Clary, or that your son should go to Edinburgh and reside there upon an estate which will be the better for his residence upon it? Your brother's passionate behaviour hereupon is hardly to be described. He resented it as promising an alienation of the affection of the family to him, and to such an height were resentments carried, every one siding with him, that the Colonel, with hands and eyes lifted up, cried out, What hearts of flint am I related to? O cousin Harlowe, to your father, are you resolved to have but one daughter? Are you, madam, to be taught by a son, who has no bowels, to forget you are a mother? The Colonel turned from them to draw out his handkerchief, and could not for a minute speak. The eyes of every one but the hard-hearted brother caught tears from his. But then turning to them, with the more indignation, as it seemed, as he had been obliged to show a humanity which, however, no brave heart should be ashamed of, I leave you all, said he, fit company for one another. I will never open my lips to any of you more upon this subject. I will instantly make my will, and in me shall the dear creature have the father, uncle, brother she has lost. I will prevail upon her to take the tour of France and Italy with me, nor shall she return till you know the value of such a daughter. And saying this, he hurried out of the room, went into the court-yard, and ordered his horse. Mr. Anthony Harlowe went to him there just as he was mounting, and said he hoped he should find him cooler in the evening, for he till then had lodged at his house, and that then they would converse calmly, and every one meantime would weigh all matters well. But the angry gentleman said, Cousin Harlowe, I shall endeavour to discharge the obligations I owe to your civility since I have been in England. But I have been so treated by that hot-headed young man, who, as far as I know, has done more to ruin his sister than Lovelace himself, and this with the approbation of you all, that I will not again enter into your doors or theirs. My servant shall have orders whither to bring what belongs to me from your house. I will see my dear cousin Clary as soon as I can. And so God bless you altogether. Only this one word to your nephew, if you please, that he wants to be taught the difference between courage and bluster, and it is happy for him, perhaps, that I am his kinsman, though I am sorry he is mine. I wondered to hear your uncle, on his return to them all, repeat this, because of the consequences it may be attended with, though I hope it will not have bad ones. Yet it was considered as a sort of challenge, and so it confirmed every body in your brother's favour, and Miss Harlowe forgot not to inveigh against that error which had brought on all these evils. I took the liberty again, but with fear and trembling, to desire leave to attend you. Before any other person could answer, your brother said, I suppose you look upon yourself, Mrs. Norton, to be your own mistress. Pray, do you want our consents and courtship to go up? If I may speak my mind, you and my sister Clary are the fittest to be together. Yet I wish you would not trouble your head about our family matters till you are desired to do so. But don't you know, brother, said Miss Harlowe, that the error of any branch of a family splits that family into two parties, and makes not only every common friend and acquaintance, but even servants judges over both. This is one of the blessed effects of my sister Clary's fault. There never was a creature so criminal, said your father, looking with displeasure at me, who had not some weak heads to pity and side with her. I wept. Your mother was so good as to take me by the hand. Come, good woman, said she, come along with me. You have too much reason to be afflicted with what afflicts us, to want additions to your grief. But, my dearest young lady, I was more touched for your sake than for my own. For I have been low in the world for a great number of years, and of consequence have been accustomed to snubs and rebuffs from the affluent. But I hope that patience is written as legibly on my forehead as haughtiness on that of any of my obligers. Your mother led me to her chamber, and there we sat and wept together for several minutes, without being able to speak either of us one word to the other. At last she broke silence, asking me if you were really and indeed so ill as it was said you were. I answered in the affirmative, and would have shown her your last letter, but she declined seeing it. I would fain have procured from her the favour of a line to you, with her blessing. I asked what was intended by your brother and sister? Would nothing satisfy them but your final reprobation? I insinuated how easy it would be, did not your duty and humility govern you, to make yourself independent as to circumstances, but that nothing but a blessing, a last blessing, was requested by you, and many other things I urge in your behalf. The following brief repetition of what she was pleased to say in answer to my pleas will give you a notion of it all, and of the present situation of things. She said she was very unhappy. She had lost the little authority she once had over her other children through one child's failing, and all influence over Mr. Harlowe and his brothers. Your father, she said, had besought her to leave it to him to take his own methods with you, and, as she valued him, to take no step in your favour unknown to him and your uncles. Yet she owned that they were too much governed by your brother. They would, however, give way in time, she knew, to a reconciliation. They designed no other, for they all still loved you. Your brother and sister, she owned, were very jealous of your coming into favour again. Yet could but Mr. Morden have kept his temper, and stood her son's first sallies, who, having always had the family grandeur in view, had carried his resentment so high, that he knew not how to descend, the conferences, so abruptly broken off just now, would have ended more happily. For that she had reason to think that a few concessions on your part, with regard to your grandfather's estate, and your cousins engaging for your submission as from proper motives, would have softened them all. Mr. Brand's account of your intimacy with the friend of the obnoxious man, she said, had, for the time, very unhappy effects. For before that she had gained some ground, but afterwards dared not, nor indeed had inclination, to open her lips in your behalf. Your continued intimacy with that Mr. Belford was wholly unaccountable, and as wholly inexcusable. What made the wish for a reconciliation, she said, more difficult was, first, that you yourself acknowledged yourself dishonoured, and it was too well known that it was your own fault that you ever were in the power of so great a profligate. Of consequence, that their and your disgrace could not be greater than it was. Yet, that you refused to prosecute the wretch. Next, that the pardon and blessing hoped for must probably be attended with your marriage to the man they hate, and who hates them as much. Very disagreeable circumstances, she said, I must allow, to found a reconciliation upon. As to her own part, she must needs say, that if there were any hope that Mr. Lovelace would become a reformed man, the letter her cousin Morden had read to them from him to you, and the justice, as she hoped it was, he did your character, though to his own condemnation, his family and fortunes being unexceptionable, and all his relations earnest to be related to you, were arguments that would weigh with her, could they have any with your father and uncles. To my plea of your illness, she could not but flatter herself, she answered, that it was from lowness of spirits and temporary dejection. A young creature, she said, so very considerate as you naturally were, and fallen so low, must have enough of that. Should they lose you, which God forbid, the scene would then indeed be sadly changed, for then those who now most resented would be most grieved, all your fine qualities would rise to their remembrance, and your unhappy error would be quite forgotten. She wished you would put yourself into your cousin's protection entirely, and have nothing more to say to Mr. Belford. And I would recommend it to your most serious consideration, my dear Miss Clary, whether now, as your cousin, who is your trustee for your grandfather's estate, is come, you should not give over all thoughts of Mr. Lovelace's intimate friend for your executor, more especially as that gentleman's interfering in the concerns of your family, should the sad event take place, which my heart aches but to think of, might be attended with those consequences which you are so desirous, in other cases, to obviate and prevent. And suppose, my dear young lady, you were to write one letter more to each of your uncles, to let them know how ill you are, and to ask their advice, and offer to be governed by it, in relation to the disposition of your estate and effects. Methinks I wish you would. I find they will send you up a large part of what has been received from that estate since it was yours, together with your current cash which you left behind you, and this by your cousin Morden, for fear you should have contracted debts which may make you uneasy. They seem to expect that you will wish to live at your grandfather's house in a private manner, if your cousin prevail not upon you to go abroad for a year or two. Friday morning. Betty was with me just now. She tells me that your cousin Morden is so much displeased with them all, that he has refused to lodge any more at your uncle Antony's, and has even taken up with inconvenient lodgings, till he is provided with others to his mind. This very much concerns them, and they repent their violent treatment of him, and the more as he is resolved, he says, to make you his sole executrix, and heir to all his fortune. What noble fortunes still, my dearest young lady, await you! I am thoroughly convinced, if it please God to preserve your life and your health, that every body will soon be reconciled to you, and that you will see many happy days. Your mother wished me not to attend you as yet, because she hopes that I may give myself that pleasure soon with every body's good liking, and even at their desire. Your cousin Morden's reconciliation with them, which they are very desirous of, I am ready to hope will include theirs with you. But if that should happen which I so much dread, and I not with you, I should never forgive myself. Let me therefore, my dearest young lady, desire you to command my attendance, if you find any danger, and if you wish me peace of mind, and no consideration shall withhold me. I hear that Miss Howe has obtained leave from her mother to see you, and intends next week to go to town for that purpose, and, as it is believed, to buy clothes for her approaching nuptials. Mr. Hickman's mother-in-law is lately dead. Her jointure of 600 a year is fallen to him, and she has, moreover, as an acknowledgment of his good behaviour to her, left him all she was worth, which was very considerable, a few legacies excepted to her own relations. These good men are uniformly good, indeed could not else be good, and never fare the worse for being so. All the world agrees he will make that fine young lady an excellent husband, and I am sorry they are not as much agreed in her making him an excellent wife. But I hope a woman of her principles would not encourage his address, if, whether she at present love him or not, she thought she could not love him, or if she preferred any other man to him. Mr. Pocock undertakes to deliver this, but fears it will be Saturday night first, if not Sunday morning. May the Almighty protect and bless you! I long to see you, my dearest young lady, I long to see you, and to fold you once more to my fond heart. I dare to say happy days are coming. Be but cheerful. Give way to hope. Whether for this world or the other, you must be happy. Wish to live, however, were it only because you are so well fitted in mind to make every one happy who has the honour to know you. What signifies this transitory eclipse? You are as near perfection, by all I have heard, as any creature in this world can be. For here is your glory. You are brightened and purified, as I may say, by your sufferings. How I long to hear your whole sad yet instructive story from your own lips. For Miss Howe's sake, who in her new engagements will so much want you. For your cousin Morden's sake. For your mother's sake, if I must go on further in your family. And yet I can say, for all their sakes, and for my sake, my dearest Miss Clary, let your resumed and accustomed magnanimity bear you up. You have many things to do, which I know not the person who will do, if you leave us. Join your prayers then to mine, that God will spare you to a world that wants you and your example, and although your days may seem to have been numbered, who knows but that, with the good King Hezekiah, you may have them prolonged, which God grant, if it be his blessed will, to the prayers of your Judith Norton. End of Letter 56. Letter 57 of Clarissa Harlowe, or The History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or The History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 57. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Monday, September 4th. The lady would not read the letter she had from Mrs. Norton till she had received the communion, for fear it should contain anything that might disturb that happy calm which she had been endeavouring to obtain for it. And when that solemn office was over, she was so composed, she said, that she thought she could receive any news, however affecting, with tranquillity. Nevertheless, in reading it, she was forced to leave off several times through weakness and a dimness in her sight, of which she complained, if I may say complained, for so easy and soft were her complaints, that they could hardly be called such. She was very much affected at divers parts of this letter. She wept several times, and sighed often. Mrs. Lovick told me, that these were the gentle exclamations she broke out into as she read. Her unkind, her cruel brother! How unsisterly! Poor dear woman! seeming to speak of Mrs. Norton. Her kind cousin! Oh, these flaming spirits! And then reflecting upon herself more than once, what a deep error is mine! What evils have I been the occasion of! When I was admitted to her presence, I have received, said she, a long and not very pleasing letter from my dear Mrs. Norton. It will soon be in your hands, I am advised against appointing you to the office you have so kindly accepted of. But you must resent nothing of these things. My choice will have an odd appearance to them: but it is now too late to alter it if I would. I would fain write an answer to it, continued she, but I have no distinct sight, Mr. Belford, no steadiness of fingers. This mistiness, however, will perhaps be gone by and by. Then turning to Mrs. Lovick, I don't think I am dying yet. Not actually dying, Mrs. Lovick, for I have no bodily pain, no numbnesses, no signs of immediate death, I think. And my breath, which used of late to be so short, is now tolerable. My head clear, my intellects free. I think I cannot be dying yet. I shall have agonies, I doubt. Life will not give up so blessedly easy, I fear. Yet how merciful is the Almighty, to give his poor creature such a sweet serenity! 'Tis what I have prayed for. What encouragement, Mrs. Lovick, so near one's dissolution, to have it to hope that one's prayers are answered! Mrs. Smith, as well as Mrs. Lovick, was with her. They were both in tears. Nor had I, any more than they, power to say a word in answer. Yet she spoke all this, as well as what follows, with a surprising composure of mind and countenance. But, Mr. Belford, said she, assuming a still sprightlier air and accent, let me talk a little to you, while I am thus able to say what I have to say. Mrs. Lovick, don't leave us, for the women were rising to go. Pray sit down, and do you, Mrs. Smith, sit down too. Dame Shelburne, take this key and open the upper drawer. I will move to it. She did, with trembling knees. Here, Mr. Belford, is my will. It is witnessed by 3 persons of Mr. Smith's acquaintance. I dare to hope that my cousin Morden will give you assistance, if you request it of him. My cousin Morden continued his affection for me; but as I have not seen him, I leave all the trouble upon you, Mr. Belford. This deed may want forms, and it does, no doubt; but the less, as I have my grandfather's will almost by heart, and have often enough heard that canvassed. I will lay it by itself in this corner, putting it at the further end of the drawer. She then took up a parcel of letters, enclosed in one cover, sealed with 3 seals of black wax. This, said she, I sealed up last night. The cover, sir, will let you know what is to be done with what it encloses. This is the superscription, holding it close to her eyes, and rubbing them. As soon as I am certainly dead, this to be broke open by Mr. Belford. Here, sir, I put it, placing it by the will. These folded papers are letters, and copies of letters, disposed according to their dates. Miss Howe will do with those as you and she shall think fit. If I receive any more, or more come when I cannot receive them, they may be put into this drawer, pulling out and pushing in the looking-glass drawer, to be given to Mr. Belford, be they from whom they will. You'll be so kind as to observe that, Mrs. Lovick, and Dame Shelburne. Here, sir, proceeded she, I put the keys of my apparel, putting them into the drawer with her papers. All is in order, and the inventory upon them, and an account of what I have disposed of, so that nobody need to ask Mrs. Smith any questions. There will be no immediate need to open or inspect the trunks which contain my wearing apparel. Mrs. Norton will open them, or order somebody to do it for her in your presence, Mrs. Lovick, for so I have directed in my will. They may be sealed up now. I shall never more have occasion to open them. She then, though I expostulated with her to the contrary, caused me to seal them up with my seal. After this she locked up the drawer where were her papers, first taking out her book of meditations, as she called it, saying she should perhaps have use for that, and then desired me to take the key of that drawer, for she should have no further occasion for that neither. All this in so composed and cheerful a manner, that we were equally surprised and affected with it. You can witness for me, Mrs. Smith, and so can you, Mrs. Lovick, proceeded she, if any one ask after my life and conversation, since you have known me, that I have been very orderly, have kept good hours, and never have lain out of your house but when I was in prison, and then you know I could not help it. O Lovelace! that thou hadst heard her or seen her, unknown to herself on this occasion, not one of us could speak a word. I shall leave the world in perfect charity, proceeded she, and turning towards the women, don't be so much concerned for me, my good friends. This is all but needful preparation, and I shall be very happy. Then again rubbing her eyes, which she said were misty, and looked more intently round upon each, particularly on me, God bless you all, said she. How kindly are you concerned for me! Who says I am friendless? Who says I am abandoned, and among strangers? Good Mr. Belford, don't be so generously humane, indeed, putting her handkerchief to her charming eyes. You will make me less happy than I am sure you wish me to be. While we were thus solemnly engaged, a servant came with a letter from her cousin Morden. Then, said she, he is not come himself.
She broke it open, but every line, she said, appeared two to her; so that, being unable to read it herself, she desired I would read it to her. I did so, and wished it were more consolatory to her. But she was all patient attention; tears, however, often trickling down her cheeks. By the date, it was written yesterday; and this is the substance of it. He tells her, that the Thursday before he had procured a general meeting of her principal relations at her father's, though not without difficulty, her haughty brother opposing it; and when met, rendering all his endeavours to reconcile them to her ineffectual. He censures him as the most ungovernable young man he ever knew. Some great sickness, he says, some heavy misfortune, is wanted to bring him to a knowledge of himself, and of what is due from him to others; and he wishes that he were not her brother and his cousin. Nor do he spare her father and uncles for being so implicitly led by him. He tells her, that he parted with them all in high displeasure, and thought never more to darken any of their doors. That he declared as much to her two uncles, who came to him on Saturday, to try to accommodate with him, and who found him preparing to go to London to attend her; and that, notwithstanding their pressing entreaties, he determined so to do, and not to go with them to Harlowe place, or to either of their own houses; and accordingly dismissed them with such an answer. But that a noble letter, as he calls it, of August 31st, being brought him about an hour after their departure, he thought it might affect them as much as it did him, and give them the exalted opinion of her virtue which was so well deserved. He therefore turned his horse's head back to her uncle Antony's, instead of forwards toward London. That accordingly arriving there, and finding her two uncles together, he read to them the affecting letter, which left none of the three a dry eye; that the absent, as is usual in such cases, bearing all the load, they accused her brother and sister, and besought him to put off his journey to town, till he could carry with him the blessings which he had formerly in vain solicited for, and, as they hoped, the happy tidings of a general reconciliation. That not doubting but his visit would be the more welcome to her, if these good ends could be obtained, he the more readily complied with their desires; but not being willing to subject himself to the possibility of receiving fresh insult from her brother, he had given her uncles a copy of her letter for the family to assemble upon, and desired to know, as soon as possible, the result of their deliberations. He tells her that he shall bring her up the accounts relating to the produce of her grandfather's estate, and adjust them with her, having actually in his hands the arrears due to her from it. He highly applauds the noble manner in which she resents your usage of her. It is impossible, he owns, that you can either deserve her, or to be forgiven; but as you do justice to her virtue, and offer to make her all the reparation now in your power, and as she is so very earnest with him not to resent that usage, and declares that you could not have been the author of her calamities but through a strange concurrence of unhappy causes, and as he is not at a loss to know how to place to a proper account that strange concurrence, he desires her not to be apprehensive of any vindictive measures from him. Nevertheless, as may be expected, he inveighs against you, as he finds that she gave you no advantage over her; but he forbears to enter further into this subject, he says, till he has the honour to see her, and the rather as she seems so much determined against you. However, he cannot but say, that he thinks you a gallant man, and a man of sense, and that you have the reputation of being thought a generous man in every instance but where the sex is concerned. In such he owns that you have taken inexcusable liberties. And he is sorry to say that there are very few young men of fortune but who allow themselves in the same. Both sexes, he observes, too much love to have each other in their power; yet he hardly ever knew man or woman, who was very fond of power, make a right use of it. If she be so absolutely determined against marrying you, as she declares she is, he hopes, he says, to prevail upon her to take, as soon as her health will permit, a little tour abroad with him, as what will probably establish it, since travelling is certainly the best physic for all those disorders which owe their rise to grief or disappointment. An absence of 2 or 3 years will endear her to every one on her return, and every one to her. He expresses his impatience to see her. He will set out, he says, the moment he knows the result of her family's determination, which he doubts not will be favourable, nor will he wait long for that. When I had read the letter through to the languishing lady, And so, my friend, said she, have I heard of a patient who actually died, while 5 or 6 principal physicians were in a consultation, and not agreed upon what name to give his distemper. The patient was an emperor, the Emperor Joseph, I think. I asked if I should write to her cousin, as he knew not how ill she was, to hasten up. By no means, she said, since, if he were not already set out, she was persuaded that she should be so low by the time he could receive my letter, and come, that his presence would but discompose and hurry her, and afflict him. I hope, however, she is not so very near her end. And without saying any more to her, when I retired, I wrote to Colonel Morden that if he expects to see his beloved cousin alive, he must lose no time in setting out. I sent this letter by his own servant. Dr. H. sent away his letter to her father by a particular hand this morning. Mrs. Walton, the milliner, has also just now acquainted Mrs. Smith that her husband had a letter brought by a special messenger from Parson Brand within this half hour, enclosing the copy of one he had written to Mr. John Harlowe, recanting his officious one. And as all these, and the copy of the lady's letter to Colonel Morden, will be with them pretty much at a time, the devil's in the family, if they are not struck with a remorse that shall burst open the double-barred doors of their hearts. Will engages to reach you with this, late as it will be, before you go to rest. He begs that I will testify for him the hour and the minute I shall give it him. It is just half an hour after 10. I pretend to be, now by use, the swiftest shorthand writer in England, next to yourself. But were matter to arise every hour to write upon, and I had nothing else to do, I cannot write so fast as you expect. And let it be remembered that your servants cannot bring letters or messages before they are written or sent. End of Letter 57. Letter 58 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 58. Dr. H. to James Harlowe, Senior, Esquire, London, September 4th. Sir, if I may judge of the hearts of other parents by my own, I cannot doubt but you will take it well to be informed that you have yet an opportunity to save yourself and family great future regret, by dispatching hither some one of it with your last blessing, and your lady's, to the most excellent of her sex. I have some reason to believe, sir, that she has been represented to you in a very different light from the true one; and this it is that induces me to acquaint you that I think her, on the best grounds, absolutely irreproachable in all her conduct which has passed under my eye, or come to my ear; and that her very misfortunes are made glorious to her, and honourable to all that are related to her, by the use she has made of them, and by the patience and resignation with which she supports herself in a painful, lingering, and dispiriting decay, and by the greatness of mind with which she views her approaching dissolution; and all this from proper motives, from motives in which a dying saint might glory. She knows not that I write. I must indeed acknowledge that I offered to do so some days ago, and that very pressingly; nor did she refuse me from obstinacy, she seemed not to know what that is, but desired me to forbear for 2 days only, in hopes that her newly arrived cousin, who, as she heard, was soliciting for her, would be able to succeed in her favour. I hope I shall not be thought an officious man on this occasion; but if I am, I cannot help it, being driven to write by a kind of parental and irresistible impulse. But, sir, whatever you think fit to do, or permit to be done, must be speedily done; for she cannot, I verily think, live a week; and how long of that short space she may enjoy her admirable intellects to take comfort in the favours you may think proper to confer upon her, cannot be said. I am, sir, your most humble servant, R. H. End of Letter 58. Letter 59 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 59. Mr. Belford to William Morden, Esquire, London, September 4th. Sir, the urgency of the case, and the opportunity by your servant, will sufficiently apologize for this trouble from a stranger to your person, who, however, is not a stranger to your merit. I understand you are employing your good offices with the parents of Miss Clarissa Harlowe and other relations, to reconcile them to the most meritorious daughter and kinswoman that ever family had to boast of. Generously as this is intended by you, we here have too much reason to think all your solicitudes on this head will be unnecessary; for it is the opinion of every one who has the honour of being admitted to her presence, that she cannot live over 3 days. So that if you wish to see her alive, you must lose no time to come up. She knows not that I write. I had done it sooner, if I had had the least doubt that before now she would not have received from you some news of the happy effects of your kind mediation in her behalf. I am, sir, your most humble servant, J. Belford. End of Letter 59. Letter 60 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain.
For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 60. Mr. Lovelace, to John Belford, Esq. Uxbridge, Tuesday morning, between 4 and 5. And can it be, that this admirable creature will so soon leave this cursed world? For cursed I shall think it, and more cursed myself, when she is gone. O Jack! Thou who canst sit so cool, and, like Addison's angel, direct and even enjoy the storm, that tears up my happiness by the roots, blame me not for my impatience, however unreasonable. If thou knowest, that already I feel the torments of the damned, in the remorse that wrings my heart, on looking back upon my past actions by her, thou wouldst not be the devil thou art, to halloo on a worrying conscience, which, without my merciless aggravations, is altogether intolerable. I know not what to write, nor what I would write. When the company that used to delight me is as uneasy to me as my reflections are painful, and I can neither help nor divert myself, must not every servant about me partake in a perturbation so sincere? Shall I give thee a faint picture of the horrible uneasiness with which my mind struggles? And faint indeed it must be, for nothing but outrageous madness can exceed it, and that only in the apprehension of others, since, as to the sufferer, it is certain that actual distraction, take it out of its lucid intervals, must be an infinitely more happy state than the state of suspense and anxiety which often brings it on. Forbidden to attend the dear creature, yet longing to see her, I would give the world to be admitted once more to her beloved presence. I ride towards London 3 or 4 times a day, resolving pro and con 20 times in 2 or 3 miles, and at last ride back, and, in view of Uxbridge, loathing even the kind friend and hospitable house, turn my horse's head again towards the town, and resolve to gratify my humour, let her take it as she will. But at the very entrance of it, after infinite canvassings, once more alter my mind, dreading to offend and shock her, lest, by that means, I should curtail a life so precious. Yesterday, in particular, to give you an idea of the strength of that impatience, which I cannot avoid suffering to break out upon my servants, I had no sooner dispatched Will, than I took horse to meet him on his return. In order to give him time, I loitered about on the road, riding up this lane to the one highway, down that to the other, just as my horse pointed, all the way cursing my very being, and though so lately looking down upon all the world, wishing to change conditions with the poorest beggar that cried to me for charity as I rode by him, and throwing him money, in hopes to obtain by his prayers the blessing my heart pants after. After I had sauntered about an hour or 2, which seemed 3 or 4 tedious ones, fearing I had slipped the fellow, I inquired at every turnpike whether a servant in such a livery had not passed through in his return from London, on a full gallop, for woe had been to the dog had I met him on a sluggish trot, and lest I should miss him at one end of Kensington, as he might take either the Acton or Hammersmith road, or at the other, as he might come through the park or not, how many score times did I ride backwards and forwards from the palace to the Gore, making myself the subject of observation to all passengers, whether on horseback or on foot, who no doubt wondered to see a well-dressed and well-mounted man, sometimes ambling, sometimes prancing, as the beast had more fire than his master, backwards and forwards in so short a compass. Yet all this time, though longing to espy the fellow, did I dread to meet him, lest he should be charged with fatal tidings. When at distance I saw any man galloping towards me, my resemblance forming fancy immediately made it to be him, and then my heart choked me. But when the person's nearer approach undeceived me, how did I curse the varlet's delay, and thee by turns! And how ready was I to draw my pistol at the stranger for having the impudence to gallop, which none but my messenger, I thought, had either right or reason to do. For all the business of the world, I am ready to imagine, should stand still on an occasion so melancholy and so interesting to me. Nay, for this week past, I could cut the throat of any man or woman I see laugh, while I am in such dejection of mind. I am now convinced that the wretches who fly from a heavy scene labour under 10 times more distress in the intermediate suspense and apprehension than they could have were they present at it, and to see and know the worst. So capable is fancy or imagination, the more immediate offspring of the soul, to outgo fact, let the subject be either joyous or grievous. And hence, as I conceive, it is, that all pleasures are greater in the expectation or in the reflection than in fruition, as all pains, which press heavy upon both parts of that unequal union by which frail mortality holds its precarious tenure, are ever most acute in the time of suffering. For how easy sit upon the reflection the heaviest misfortunes, when surmounted! But most easy, I confess, those in which body has more concern than soul. This, however, is a point of philosophy I have neither time nor head just now to weigh, so take it as it falls from a madman's pen. Woe be to either of the wretches who shall bring me the fatal news that she is no more! For it is but too likely that a shriek owl so hated will never hoot or scream again,
unless the shock, that will probably disorder my whole frame on so sad an occasion, by unsteadying my hand, shall divert my aim from his head, heart, or bowels, if it turn not against my own. But surely she will not, she cannot yet die. Such a matchless excellence, whose mind contains a world, and seems for all things framed, could not be lent to be so soon demanded back again. But may it not be that thou, Belford, art in a plot with the dear creature, who will not let me attend her to convince myself, in order to work up my soul to the deepest remorse, and that, when she is convinced of the sincerity of my penitence, and when my mind is made such wax as to be fit to take what impression she pleases to give it, she will then raise me up with the joyful tidings of her returning health and acceptance of me? What would I give to have it so? And when the happiness of hundreds, as well as the peace and reconciliation of several eminent families, depend upon her restoration and happiness, why should it not be so? But let me presume it will. Let me indulge my former hope, however improbable. I will, and enjoy it too. And let me tell thee how ecstatic my delight would be on the unravelling of such a plot as this. Do, dear Belford, let it be so. And, O my dearest and ever dear Clarissa, keep me no longer in this cruel suspense, in which I suffer 1,000 times more than ever I made thee suffer. Nor fear thou that I will resent or recede on an éclaircissement so desirable. For I will adore thee for ever, and without reproaching thee for the pangs thou hast tortured me with, confess thee as much my superior in virtue and honour. But once more, should the worst happen, say not what that worst is, and I am gone from this hated island, gone for ever, and may eternal... But I am crazed already, and will therefore conclude myself, thine more than my own, and no great compliment neither, R.L. End of Letter 60. Letter 61 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 61. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq. Tuesday, September 9th, in the morning, at Mr. Smith's. When I read yours of this morning, I could not help pitying you for the account you give of the dreadful anxiety and suspense you labour under. I wish from my heart all were to end as you are so willing to hope, but it will not be, and your suspense, if the worst part of your torment, as you say it is, will soon be over. But, alas, in a way you wish not. I attended the lady just now. She is extremely ill. Yet is she aiming at an answer to her Norton's letter, which she began yesterday in her own chamber, and has written a good deal, but in a hand not like her own fine one, as Mrs. Lovick tells me, but larger, and the lines crooked. I have accepted of the offer of a room adjoining to the widow Lovick's, till I see how matters go, but unknown to the lady, and I shall go home every night for a few hours. I would not lose a sentence that I could gain from lips so instructive, nor the opportunity of receiving any command from her, for an estate. In this my new apartment I now write, and shall continue to write, as occasions offer, that I may be the more circumstantial. But I depend upon the return of my letters, or copies of them, on demand, that I may have together all that relates to this affecting story, which I shall reperuse with melancholy pleasure to the end of my life. I think I will send thee Brand's letter to Mr. John Harlowe, recanting his base surmises. It is a matchless piece of pedantry, and may perhaps a little divert thy deep chagrin. Some time hence at least it may, if not now. What wretched creatures are there in the world! What strangely mixed creatures! So sensible and so silly at the same time! What a various, what a foolish creature is man! 3 o'clock. The lady has just finished her letter, and has entertained Mrs. Lovick, Mrs. Smith, and me, with a noble discourse on the vanity and brevity of life, to which I cannot do justice in the repetition. And indeed I am so grieved for her, that, ill as she is, my intellects are not half so clear as hers. A few things which made the strongest impression upon me, as well from the sentiments themselves as from her manner of uttering them, I remember. She introduced them thus: I am thinking, said she, what a gradual and happy death God Almighty, blessed be his name, affords me. Who would have thought that, suffering what I have suffered, and abandoned as I have been, with such a tender education as I have had, I should be so long a dying? But see now, by little and little, it had come to this. I was first taken off from the power of walking. Then I took a coach. A coach grew too violent an exercise. Then I took up a chair. The prison was a large death stride upon me. I should have suffered longer else. Next, I was unable to go to church. Then to go up or down stairs. Now hardly can move from one room to another,
and a less room will soon hold me. My eyes begin to fail me, so that at times I cannot see to read distinctly, and now I can hardly write or hold a pen. Next, I presume, I shall know nobody, nor be able to thank any of you. I therefore now once more thank you, Mrs. Lovick, and you, Mrs. Smith, and you, Mr. Belford. Well, I can thank you, for all your kindness to me. And thus by little and little, in such a gradual sensible death as I am blessed with, God dies away in us, as I may say, all human satisfaction, in order to subdue his poor creatures to himself. Thou mayest guess how affected we all were at this moving account of her progressive weakness. We heard it with wet eyes; for what with the women's example, and what with her moving eloquence, I could no more help it than they. But we were silent nevertheless, and she went on, applying herself to me. O Mr. Belford, this is a poor transitory life in the best enjoyments. We flutter about here and there with all our vanities about us, like painted butterflies, for a gay, but a very short season, till at last we lay ourselves down in a quiescent state, and turn into vile worms; and who knows in what form, or to what condition, we shall rise again? I wish you would permit me, a young creature, just turned of 19 years of age, blooming and healthy as I was a few months ago, now nipped by the cold hand of death, to influence you, in these my last hours, to a life of regularity and repentance for any past evils you may have been guilty of. For believe me, Sir, that now, in this last stage, very few things will bear the test, or be passed as laudable, if pardonable, at our own bar; much less at a more tremendous one, in all we have done, or delighted in, even in a life not very offensive neither, as we may think. Ought we not then to study in our full day, before the dark hours approach, so to live, as may afford reflections that will soften the agony of the last moments when they come, and let in upon the departing soul a ray of divine mercy to illuminate its passage into an awful eternity? She was ready to faint, and choosing to lie down, I withdrew, I need not say with a melancholy heart; and when I got to my new taken apartment, my heart was still more affected by the sight of the solemn letter the admirable lady had so lately finished. It was communicated to me by Mrs. Lovick, who had it to copy for me; but it was not to be delivered to me till after her departure. However, I trespassed so far, as to prevail upon the widow to let me take a copy of it, which I did directly in character. I send it enclosed. If thou canst read it, and thy heart not bleed at thy eyes, thy remorse can hardly be so deep as thou hast inclined me to think it is. End of Letter 61. Letter 62 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 62. Miss Clarissa Harlowe to Mrs. Norton. Begun on Monday, September 4th, and by piecemeal finished on Tuesday, but not sent till the Thursday following. My dearest Mrs. Norton, I am afraid I shall not be able to write all that is upon my mind to say to you upon the subject of your last, yet I will try. As to my friends, and as to the sad breakfasting, I cannot help being afflicted for them. What, alas, has not my mother in particular suffered by my rashness? Yet to allow so much for a son, so little for a daughter! But all now will soon be over as to me. I hope they will bury all their resentments in my grave. As to your advice in relation to Mr. Belford, let me only say, that the unhappy reprobation I have met with, and my short time, must be my apology now. I wish I could have written to my mother and my uncles, as you advise, and yet favours come so slowly from them. The granting of one request only now remains as a desirable one from them, which nevertheless, when granted, I shall not be sensible of. It is that they will be pleased to permit my remains to be laid with those of my ancestors, placed at the feet of my dear grandfather, as I have mentioned in my will. This, however, as they please. For, after all, this vile body ought not so much to engage my cares. It is a weakness; but let it be called a natural weakness, and I shall be excused, especially when a reverential gratitude shall be known to be the foundation of it. You know, my dear woman, how my grandfather loved me; and you know how much I honoured him, and that from my very infancy to the hour of his death. How often since have I wished that he had not loved me so well! I wish not now, at the writing of this, to see even my cousin Morden. O my blessed woman! My dear maternal friend! I am entering upon a better tour than to France or Italy either. or even than to settle at my once beloved dairy house. All these prospects and pleasures, which used to be so agreeable to me in health, how poor seem they to me now! Indeed, my dear Mamma Norton, I shall be happy. I know I shall. I have charming forebodings of happiness already. Tell all my dear friends, for their comfort, that I shall. Who would not bear the punishments I have borne, to have the prospects and assurances I rejoice in? Assurances I might not have had, were my own wishes to have been granted to me. Neither do I want to see even you, my dear Mrs. Norton. Nevertheless I must, in justice to my own gratitude, declare, that there was a time, could you have been permitted to come, without incurring displeasure from those whose esteem it is necessary for you to cultivate and preserve, that your presence and comfortings would have been balm to my wounded mind. But were you now, even by consent, and with reconciliatory tidings to come, it would but add to your grief, and the sight of one I so dearly love, so happily fraught with good news, might but draw me back to wishes I have had great struggles to get above. And let me tell you, for your comfort, that I have not left undone any thing that ought to be done, either respecting mind or person, no, not to the minutest preparation, so that nothing is left for you to do for me. Every one has her direction as to the last offices, and my desk, that I now write upon. O my dearest Mrs. Norton, all is provided, all is ready, and all will be as decent as it should be. And pray let my Miss Howe know, that by the time you will receive this, and she your signification of the contents of it, will, in all probability, be too late for her to do me the inestimable favour, as I should once have thought it, to see me. God will have no rivals in the hearts of those he sanctifies. By various methods he deadens all other sensations, or rather absorbs them all in the love of him. I shall nevertheless love you, my Mamma Norton, and my Miss Howe, whose love to me has passed the love of woman, to my latest hour. But yet I am now above the quick sense of those pleasures which once delighted me, and once more I say, that I do not wish to see objects so dear to me, which might bring me back again into sense, and rival my supreme love. Twice have I been forced to leave off. I wished that my last writing might be to you or to Miss Howe, if it might not be to my dearest Mamma, I would have wrote. Is the word distinct? My eyes are so misty. If, when I apply to you, I break off in half words, do you supply them. The kindest are your due. Be sure take the kindest, to fill up chasms with, if any chasms there be. Another breaking off. But the new day seems to rise upon me with healing in its wings. I have gotten, I think, a recruit of strength. Spirits, I bless God, I have not of late wanted. Let my dearest Miss Howe purchase her wedding garments, and may all temporal blessings attend the charming preparation. Blessings will, I make no question, notwithstanding the little cloudiness that Mr. Hickman encounters with now and then, which are but prognostications of a future golden day to him, for her heart is good, and her head not wrong. But great merit is coy, and that coyness had not always its foundation in pride. But if it should seem to be pride, take off the skin-deep covering, and in her it is noble diffidence, and a love that wants but to be assured. Tell Mr. Hickman I write this, and write it, as I believe, with my last pen, and bid him bear a little at first, and forbear, and all the future will be crowning gratitude and rewarding love. For Miss Howe had great sense, fine judgment, and exalted generosity. And can such a one be ungrateful or easy, under those obligations which his assiduity and obligingness, when he shall be so happy as to call her his, will lay her under to him? As for me, never bride was so ready as I am. My wedding garments are bought, and though not fine or gaudy to the sight, though not adorned with jewels, and set off with gold and silver, for I have no beholder's eyes to wish to glitter in, yet will they be the easiest, the happiest suit that ever bridal maiden wore. For they are such as carry with them a security against all those anxieties, pains, and perturbations, which sometimes succeed to the most promising outsettings. And now, my dear Mrs. Norton, do I wish for no other. O hasten, good God, if it be thy blessed will, the happy moment that I am to be decked out in his all-quieting garb, and sustain, comfort, bless, and protect, with the all-shadowing wing of thy mercy, my dear parents, my uncles, my brother, my sister, my cousin Morden, my ever-dear and ever-kind Miss Howe, my good Mrs. Norton, and every deserving person to whom they wish well, is the ardent prayer, first and last, of every beginning hour, as the clock tells it me, hours now are days, nay, years, of your now not sorrowing or afflicted, but happy Clarissa Harlowe. End of Letter 62. Letter 63 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee, Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson, Letter 63. Mr. Lovelace to John Belford, Esquire, Wednesday morning, September 6, half an hour after 3. I am not the savage which you and my worst enemies think me. My soul is too much penetrated by the contents of the letter which you enclosed in your last, to say one word more to it, than that my heart has bled over it from every vein. I will fly from the subject. But what other can I choose that will not be as grievous and lead into the same? I could quarrel with all the world, with thee as well as the rest, obliging as thou supposest thyself for writing to me hourly. How darest thou, though unknown to her, to presume to take an apartment under the same roof with her? I cannot bear to think that thou shouldst be seen at all hours passing to and repassing from her apartments, while I, who have so much reason to call her mine, and one was preferred by her to all the world, am forced to keep aloof, and hardly dare to enter the city where she is. If there be any thing in Brand's letter that will divert me, hasten it to me. But nothing now will ever divert me, will ever again give me joy or pleasure. I can neither eat, drink, nor sleep. I am sick of all the world. Surely it will be better when all is over, when I know the worst the fates can do against me. Yet how shall I bear that worst? O Belford, Belford, write it not to me. But if it must happen, get somebody else to write. For I shall curse the pen, the hand, the head, and the heart, employed in communicating to me the fatal tidings. But what is this saying, when already I curse the whole world except her, myself most? In fine, I am a most miserable being. Life is a burden to me. I would not bear it upon these terms for 1 week more, let what would be my lot. For already is there a hell begun in my own mind. Never more mention it to me. Let her, or who will say it, the prison, I cannot bear it. May damnation seize quick the cursed woman, who could set death upon taking that large stride, as the dear creature calls it. I had no hand in it. But her relations, her implacable relations, have done the business. All else would have been got over. Never persuade me but it would. The fire of youth and the violence of passion would have pleaded for me to good purpose with an individual of a sex which loves to be addressed with passionate ardour, even to tumult, had it not been for that cruelty and unforgivingness which, the object and the penitence considered, have no example, and have aggravated the heinousness of my faults. Unable to rest, though I went not to bed till 2, I dispatched this ere the day dawn. Who knows what this night, this dismal night, may have produced? I must after my messenger. I have told the varlet I will meet him, perhaps at Knightsbridge, perhaps in Piccadilly. And I trust not myself with pistols, not only on his account, but my own, for pistols are too ready a mischief. I hope thou hast a letter ready for him. He goes to thy lodgings first, for surely thou wilt not presume to take thy rest in an apartment near hers. If he miss thee there, he flies to Smith's, and brings me word whether in being or not. I shall look for him through the air as I ride, as well as on horseback. For if the prince of it serve me as well as I have served him, he will bring the dog by his ears, like another Habakkuk, to my saddle bow, with the tidings that my heart pants after. Nothing but the excruciating pangs the condemned soul feels, at its entrance into the eternity of the torments we are taught to fear, can exceed what I now feel, and have felt for almost this week past. And mayst thou have a spice of those, if thou hast not a letter ready written for thy Lovelace. End of Letter 63. Letter 64 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee, Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 64. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esquire, Tuesday, September 5th, 6 o'clock. The lady remains exceedingly weak and ill. Her intellects, nevertheless, continue clear and strong, and her piety and patience are without example. Every one thinks this night will be her last. What a shocking thing is that to say of such an excellence! She will not, however, send away her letter to her Norton as yet. She endeavoured in vain to superscribe it, so desired me to do it. Her fingers will not hold the pen with the requisite steadiness. She has, I fear, written and read her last. 8 o'clock. She is somewhat better than she was. The doctor had been here, and thinks she will hold out yet a day or 2. He has ordered her, as for some time past, only some little cordials to take when ready to faint. She seemed disappointed when he told her she might yet live 2 or 3 days, and said she longed for dismission. Life was not so easily extinguished, she saw, as some imagined. Death from grief was, she believed, the slowest of deaths. but God's will must be done. Her only prayer was now for submission to it; for she doubted not but by the divine goodness she should be an happy creature, as soon as she could be divested of these rags of mortality. Of her own accord she mentioned you, which till then she had avoided to do. She asked, with great serenity, where you were. I told her where, and your motives for being so near, and read to her a few lines of yours of this morning, in which you mention your wishes to see her, your sincere affliction, and your resolution not to approach her without her consent. I would have read more, but she said, Enough, Mr. Belford, enough. Poor man, does his conscience begin to find him? Then need not any body to wish him a greater punishment. May it work upon him to an happy purpose. I took the liberty to say, that as she was in such a frame that nothing now seemed capable of discomposing her, I could wish that you might have the benefit of her exhortations, which, I dared to say, while you were so seriously affected, would have a greater force upon you than 1,000 sermons, and how happy you would think yourself, if you could but receive her forgiveness on your knees. How can you think of such a thing, Mr. Belford? Said she, with some emotion. My composure is owing, next to the divine goodness blessing my earnest supplications for it, to the not seeing him. Yet let him know that I now again repeat, that I forgive him, and may God Almighty, clasping her fingers, and lifting up her eyes, forgive him too, and perfect repentance, and sanctify it to him. Tell him I say so, and tell him, that if I could not say so with my whole heart, I should be very uneasy, and think that my hopes of mercy were but weakly founded, and that I had still, in my harboured resentment, some hankerings after a life which he has been the cause of shortening. The divine creature then turning aside her head, Poor man, said she, I once could have loved him. This is saying more than ever I could say of any other man out of my own family. Would he have permitted me to have been an humble instrument to have made him good, I think I could have made him happy. But tell him not this, if he be really penitent, it may too much affect him. There she paused. Admirable creature! Heavenly forgiver! Then resuming, But pray tell him, that if I could know that my death might be a mean to reclaim and save him, it would be an inexpressible satisfaction to me. But let me not, however, be made uneasy with the apprehension of seeing him. I cannot bear to see him. Just as she had done speaking, the minister, who had so often attended her, sent up his name, and was admitted. Being apprehensive that it would be with difficulty that you could prevail upon that impetuous spirit of yours not to invade her in her dying hours, and of the agonies into which a surprise of this nature would throw her, I thought this gentleman's visit afforded a proper opportunity to renew the subject, and having asked her leave, acquainted him with the topic we had been upon. The good man urged that some condescensions were usually expected, on these solemn occasions, from pious souls like hers, however satisfied with themselves, for the sake of showing the world, and for example's sake, that all resentments against those who had most injured them were subdued. And if she would vouchsafe to a heart so truly penitent, as I had represented Mr. Lovelace's to be, that personal pardon, which I had been pleading for, there would be no room to suppose the least lurking resentment remained, and it might have very happy effects upon the gentleman. I have no lurking resentment, sir, said she. This is not a time for resentment. And you will be the readier to believe me when I can assure you, looking at me, that even what I have most rejoiced in, the truly friendly love that has so long subsisted between my Miss Howe and her Clarissa, although to my last gasp it will be the dearest to me of all that is dear in this life, has already abated of its fervour, has already given place to supremer fervours. And shall the remembrance of Mr. Lovelace's personal insults, which I bless God never corrupted that mind which her friendship so much delighted, be stronger in these hours with me, than the remembrance of a love as pure as the human heart ever boasted? Tell therefore the world, if you please, and, if, Mr. Belford, you think what I said to you before not strong enough, tell the poor man, that I not only forgive him, but have such earnest wishes for the good of his soul, and that from consideration of its immortality, that could my penitence avail for more sins than my own, my last tear should fall for him, by whom I die. Our eyes and hands expressed to us both what our lips could not utter. Say not then, proceeded she, nor let it be said, that my resentments are unsubdued. And yet these eyes, lifted up to heaven as witness to the truth of what I have said, shall never, if I can help it, behold him more. For do you not consider, sirs, how short my time is, what much more important subjects I have to employ it upon, and how unable I should be, so weak as I am, to contend even with the avowed penitence of a person in strong health, governed by passions unabated, and always violent. And now I hope you will never urge me more on this subject. The minister said it were pity ever to urge this plea again. You see, Lovelace, that I did not forget the office of a friend, in endeavouring to prevail upon her to give you her last forgiveness personally. And I hope, as she is so near her end, you will not invade her in her last hours, since she must be extremely discomposed at such an interview, and it might make her leave the world the sooner for it. This reminds me of an expression which she used on your barbarous hunting of her at Smith's, on her return to her lodgings, and that with a serenity unexampled, as Mrs. Lovick told me, considering the occasion, and the trouble given her by it, and her indisposition at the time. He will not let me die decently, said the angelic sufferer. He will not let me enter into my Maker's presence with the composure that is required in entering into the drawing-room of an earthly prince. I cannot, however, forbear to wish that the heavenly creature could have prevailed upon herself in these her last hours to see you, and that for my sake as well as yours. For although I am determined never to be guilty of the crimes which, till within these few past weeks, have blackened my former life, and for which at present I most heartily hate myself, yet should I be less apprehensive of such a relapse, if wrought upon by the solemnity which such an interview must have been attended with, you had become a reformed man. For no devil do I fear, but one in your shape. It is now 11 o'clock at night. The lady, who retired to rest an hour ago, is, as Mrs. Lovick tells me, in a sweet slumber. I will close here. I hope I shall find her the better for it in the morning. Yet, alas, how frail is hope! How frail is life! when we are apt to build so much on every shadowy relief, although in such a desperate case as this, sitting down to reflect, we must know that it is but shadowy. I will enclose Brand's horrid pedantry, and for once am aforehand with thy ravenous impatience. End of Letter 64. Letter 65 of Clarissa Harlowe, or The History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or The History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 65. Mr. Brand to Mr. John Walton, Saturday night, September 2nd. Dear Mr. Walton, I am obliged to you for the very handsomely penned and elegantly written letter which you have sent me on purpose to do justice to the character of the younger Miss Harlowe. And yet I must tell you that I had reason, before that came, to think, and to know, indeed, that we were all wrong. And so I had employed the greatest part of this week in drawing up an apologetical letter to my worthy patron, Mr. John Harlowe, in order to set all matters right between me and them, and, as far as I could, between them and Miss. So it required little more than connection and transcribing when I received yours, and it will be with Mr. Harlowe aforesaid to-morrow morning, and this and the copy of that will be with you on Monday morning. You cannot imagine how sorry I am that you and Mrs. Walton and Mrs. Barker and I myself should have taken matters up so lightly, judging, alas a day, by appearance and conjecture, where character and reputation are concerned. Horace says truly, et semel emissum volat irrevocabile verbum. That is, words once spoken cannot be recalled. But, Mr. Walton, they may be contradicted by other words, and we may confess ourselves guilty of a mistake, and express our concern for being mistaken, and resolve to make our mistake a warning to us for the future. And this is all that can be done, and what every worthy mind will do, and what nobody can be readier to do than we four undesigning offenders, as I see by your letter on your part, and as you will see by the enclosed copy on mine, which, if it be received as I think it ought, and as I believe it will, must give me a speedy opportunity to see you when I visit the lady, to whom, as you will see in it, I expect to be sent up with the olive branch. The matter in which we all erred must be owned to be very nice, and Mr. Belford's character considered, appearances ran very strong against the lady. But all that this serveth to show is, that in doubtful matters the wisest people may be mistaken, for so saith the poet, Fallitur in dubiis hominum solatia rebus. If you have an opportunity, you may, as if from yourself, and unknown to me, show the enclosed to Mr. Belford, who, you tell me, resenteth the matter very heinously, but not to let him see or hear read those words that relate to him in the paragraph at the bottom of the second page, beginning, "But yet I do insist upon it," to the end of that paragraph; for one would not make oneself enemies, you know, and I have reason to think that this Mr. Belford is as passionate and fierce a man as Mr. Lovelace. What pity it is the lady could find no worthier a protector! You may paste those lines over with blue or black paper before he seeth it, and if he insisteth upon taking a copy of my letter, for he or any body that seeth it, or heareth it read, will no doubt be glad to have by them the copy of a letter so full of the sentiments of the noblest writers of antiquity, and so well adapted, as I will be bold to say they are, to the point in hand. I say, if he insisteth upon taking a copy. Let him give you the strongest assurances not to suffer it to be printed on any account, and I make the same request to you that you will not. For if any thing be to be made of a man's works, who but the author should have the advantage? And if the Spectators, the Tattlers, the Examiners, the Guardians, and other of our polite papers, make such a strutting with a single verse, or so by way of motto, in the front of each day's paper, and if other authors pride themselves in finding out and embellishing the title pages of their books with a verse or adage from the classical writers, what a figure would such a letter as the enclosed make, so full fraught with admirable precepts, and apropos quotations from the best authority? I have been told that a certain noble lord, who once sat himself down to write a pamphlet in behalf of a great minister, after taking infinite pains to no purpose to find a Latin motto, gave commission to a friend of his to offer to any one who could help him to a suitable one, but of 1 or 2 lines, a hamper of claret. Accordingly his lordship had a motto found him from Juvenal, which he, unhappily mistaking, not knowing Juvenal was a poet, printed as a prose sentence in his title page. If then 1 or 2 lines were of so much worth, a hamper of claret no less, of what inestimable value would such a letter as mine be deemed? And who knoweth but that this noble peer, who is now living, if he should happen to see this letter shining with such a glorious string of jewels, might give the writer a scarf, in order to have him always at hand, or be a mean, some way or other, to bring him into notice? I would be bold to say, bad as the world is, a man of sound learning wanteth nothing but an initiation to make his fortune. I hope, my good friend, that the lady will not die. I shall be much grieved if she doth, and the more because of mine unhappy misrepresentation. So will you for the same cause, so will her parents and friends. They are very rich and very worthy gentlefolks. But let me tell you, by the by, that they had carried the matter against her so far, that I believe in my heart they were glad to justify themselves by my report, and would have been less pleased had I made a more favourable one. And yet in their hearts they dote upon her. But now they are all, as I hear, inclined to be friends with her, and forgive her, her brother as well as the rest. But their cousin, Colonel Morden, a very fine gentleman, had had such high words with them, and they with him, that they know not how to stoop, lest it should look like being frighted into an accommodation. Hence it is that I, having taken the greater liberty to press the reconciliation, and I hope in such good season that they will all be pleased with it, for can they have a better handle to save their pride all round than by my mediation? And let me tell you, inter nos, betwixt ourselves, very proud they all are. By this honest means, for by dishonest ones I would not be Archbishop of Canterbury, I hope to please everybody, to be forgiven in the first place by the lady, whom being a lover of learning and learned men, I shall have great opportunities of obliging. For when she departed from her father's house, I had but just the honour of her notice, and she seemed highly pleased with my conversation, and next to be thanked and respected by her parents, and all her family, as I am, I bless God for it, by my dear friend Mr. John Harlowe, who indeed is a man that professeth a great esteem for men of erudition, and who, with singular delight, I know, will run over with me the authorities I have quoted, and wonder at my memory, and the happy knack I have of recommending mine own sense of things in the words of the greatest sages of antiquity. Excuse me, my good friend, for this seeming vanity. The great Cicero, you must have heard, I suppose, had a much greater spice of it, and wrote a long letter begging and praying to be flattered. But if I say less of myself than other people who know me say of me, I think I keep a medium between vanity and false modesty, the latter of which oftentimes gives itself the lie, when it is declaring of the compliments that everybody gives it as its due, and hypocrisy as well as folly that, I hope, I shall for ever scorn to be guilty of. I have another reason, as I may tell to you, my old schoolfellow, to make me wish for this fine lady's recovery and health, and that is, by some distant intimations I have heard from Mr. John Harlowe, that it is very likely, because of the slur she hath received, that she will choose to live privately and penitently, and will probably, when she cometh into her estate, keep a chaplain, to direct her in her devotions and penitence. If she doth, who can stand a better chance than myself? And as I find by your account, as well as by everybody's, that she is innocent as to intention, and is resolved never to think of Mr. Lovelace more, who knoweth what, in time, may happen? And yet it must be after Mr. Lovelace's death, which may possibly sooner happen than he thinketh of, by means of his detestable courses. For, after all, a man who is of public utility ought not, for the finest woman in the world, to lay his throat at the mercy of a man who boggleth at nothing. I beseech you, let not this hint go further than to yourself, your spouse, and Mrs. Barker. I know I may trust my life in your hands, and theirs. There have been, let me tell ye, unlikelier things come to pass, and that with rich widows, some of quality truly, whose choice in their first marriages hath perhaps been guided by motives of convenience or mere corporalities, as I may say, but who by their second have had for their view the corporal and spiritual mingled, which is the most eligible, no doubt, to substance composed of both, as men and women are. Nor think, sir, that should such a thing come to pass, either would be disgraced, since the lady in me would marry a gentleman and a scholar, and as to mine own honour, as the slur would bring her high fortunes down to an equivalence with my mean ones, if fortune only, and not merit, be considered, so hath not the life of this lady been so tainted, either by length of time, or naughtiness of practice, as to put on a foot with the cast abigails that, too often, God knoweth, are thought good enough for a young clergyman who perhaps is drawn in by a poor benefice, and, if the wicked one be not quite worn out, groweth poorer and poorer upon it, by an increase of family, he knoweth not whether is most his, or his noble, ignoble, I should say, patrons. But all this apart, and in confidence. I know you made at school but a small progress in languages, so I have restrained myself from many illustrations from the classics that I could have filled this letter with, as I have done the enclosed one, and being at a distance I cannot explain them to you as I do to my friend Mr. John Harlowe, and who after all is obliged to me for pointing out to him many beauties of the authors I quote, which otherwise would lie concealed from him, as they must from every common observer. But this too inter nos, for he would not take it well to have it known. Jays, you know, old schoolfellow, jays, you know, will strut in peacock's feathers. But whither am I running? I never know where to end when I get upon learned topics, and albeit I cannot compliment you with the name of a learned man, yet are you a sensible man, and, as such, must have pleasure in learned men and in their writings. In this confidence, Mr. Walton, with my kind respects to the good ladies, your spouse and sister, and in hopes for the young lady's sake soon to follow this long epistle in person, I conclude myself your loving and faithful friend, Elias Brand. You will perhaps, Mr. Walton, wonder at the meaning of the lines drawn under many of the words and sentences. Underscoring, we call it, and were my letters to be printed, those would be put in a different character. Now you must know, sir, that we learned men do this to point out to the readers, who are not so learned, where the jet of our arguments lieth, and the emphasis they are to lay upon those words, whereby they will take in readily our sense and cogency. Some pragmatical people have said that an author who doth a great deal of this either calleth his readers fools, or tacitly condemneth his own style, as supposing his meaning would be dark without it, or that all of his force lay in words. But all of those with whom I have conversed in a learned way think as I think. And to give a very pretty, though familiar illustration, I have considered a page distinguished by different characters as a verdant field, overspread with butterflowers and daisies and other summer flowers. These the poems liken to enamelling. Have you not read in the poets of enamelled meads, and so forth? End of letter 65. Letter 66 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or The History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 66. Mr. Brand, to John Harlowe, Esquire, Saturday night, September 2nd. Worthy Sir, I am under no small concern that I should unhappily be the occasion, I am sure I intended nothing like it, of widening differences by light misreport, when it is the duty of one of my function, and no less consisting with my inclination, to heal and reconcile. I have received 2 letters to set me right, one from a particular acquaintance, whom I set to inquire of Mr. Belford's character, and that came on Tuesday last, informing me that your unhappy niece was greatly injured in the account I had had of her, for I had told him of it, and that with very great concern, I am sure, apprehending it to be true. So I then set about writing to you to acknowledge the error, and had gone a good way in it, when the second letter came, a very handsome one it is, both in style and penmanship, from my friend Mr. Walton, though I am sure it cannot be his inditing, expressing his sorrow, and his wife's, and his sister-in-law's likewise, for having been the cause of misleading me in the account I gave of the said young lady, whom they now say, upon further inquiry, they find to be the most unblameable and most prudent, and, it seems, the most pious young lady that ever once committed a great error, as to be sure hers was, in leaving such worthy parents and relations for so vile a man as Mr. Lovelace. But what shall we say? Why, the divine Virgil tells us, improbe amor, quid non mortalia pectora cogis. For my part, I was but too much afraid, for we have great opportunities. You are sensible, Sir, at the University, of knowing human nature from books, the calm result of the wise man's wisdom, as I may say, haurit aquam cribro, qui discere vult sine libro, uninterrupted by the noise and vanities that will mingle with personal conversation, which, in the turbulent world, is not to be enjoyed but over a bottle, where you have 100 foolish things passed to one that deserveth to be remembered. I was but too much afraid, I say, that so great a slip might be attended with still greater and worse, for your Horace, and my Horace, the most charming writer that ever lived among the pagans, for the lyric kind of poetry, I mean, for, to be sure, Homer and Virgil would otherwise be first named in their way, well observeth, and who understood human nature better than he, nec vera virtus, cum semel excidit, curat reponi deterioribus. And Ovid no less wisely observeth, et mala sunt vicina bonis, errore sub illo, pro vitio virtus crimina saepe tulit. Who that can draw knowledge from its fountainhead, the works of the sages of antiquity, improved by the comments of the moderns, but would prefer to all others the silent quiet life which contemplative men lead in the seats of learning, were they not called out according to their dedication to the service and instruction of the world? Now, Sir, another favourite poet of mine, and not the less a favourite for being a Christian, telleth us, that ill is the custom of some, when in a fault, to throw the blame upon the backs of others. Hominum quoque mos est, quae nos cumque premunt, alieno imponere tergo. Mant. But I, though in this case misled, well intendedly, nevertheless, both in the misleaders and misled, and therefore entitled to lay hold of that plea, if anybody is so entitled, will not, however, be classed among such extenuators, but, contrarily, will always keep in mind that verse which comforteth in mistake, as well as instructeth, and which I quoted in my last letter, errare est hominis, sed non persistere, and will own that I was very rash to take up with conjectures and consequences drawn from probabilities where especially the character of so fine a lady was concerned. Credere fallacy gravis est dementia fame. Mant. Notwithstanding, Miss Clarissa Harlowe, I must be bold to say, is the only young lady that ever I heard of, or indeed read of, that, having made such a false step, so soon, of her own accord, as I may say, recovered herself, and conquered her love of the deceiver, a great conquest indeed, and who flieth him, and resolveth to die rather than to be his, which now, to her never dying honour, I am well assured, is the case, and in justice to her, I am now ready to take to myself, with no small vexation, that of Ovid, Heu, patior telis vulnera facta meis, But yet I do insist upon it, that all that part of my information, which I took upon mine own personal inquiry, which is what relates to Mr. Belford and his character, is literally true. For there is not any where to be met with a man of a more libertine character, as to women, Mr. Lovelace excepted, than he beareth. And so, Sir, I must desire of you, that you will not let any blame lie upon my intention, since you see how ready I am to accuse myself of too lightly giving ear to a rash information, not knowing it to be so, however, for I depended the more upon it, as the people I had it from are very sober, and live in the fear of God, and indeed, when I wait upon you, you will see by their letter that they must be conscientious good people. Wherefore, Sir, let me be entitled, from all your good family, to that of my last-named poet. Aspera confesso verba remitte reo. And now, Sir, what is much more becoming of my function, let me, instead of appearing with the face of an accuser and a rash censurer, which in my heart I have not deserved to be thought, assume the character of a reconciler, and propose, by way of penance to myself for my fault, to be sent up as a messenger of peace to the pious young lady, for they write me word absolutely, and I believe in my heart truly, that the doctors have given her over, and that she cannot live. Alas! alas! What a sad thing would that be, if the poor bough, that was only designed, as I very well know, and am fully assured, to be bent, should be broken. Let it not, dear Sir, seem to the world, that there was anything in your resentments, which while meant for reclaiming were just and fit, that hath the appearance of violence, and fierce wrath, and inexorability, as it would look to some, if carried to extremity after repentance, and contrition, and humiliation, on the fair offender's side. For all this while, it seemeth, she hath been a second Magdalen in her penitence, and yet not so bad as a Magdalen in her faults. Faulty, nevertheless, as she hath been once, the Lord knoweth. Nam vitiis nemo sine nascitur, optimus ille est, qui minimis urgentur, saith Horace. Now, Sir, if I may be named for this blessed employment, for blessed is the peacemaker, I will hasten to London, and as I know Miss had always a great regard to the function I have the honour to be of, I have no doubt of making myself acceptable to her, and to bring her by sound arguments and good advice into a liking of life, which must be the first step to her recovery, for when the mind is made easy, the body will not long suffer, and the love of life is a natural passion that is soon revived when fortune turneth about and smileth. Vivere quisque diu, quam vis et agenus et ager optat. Ovid. And the sweet Lucan truly observeth, Fatis debentibus annos, mors in vita subit. And now, Sir, let me tell you what shall be the tenor of my pleadings with her, and comfortings of her, as she is, as I may say, a learned lady, and as I can explain to her those sentences which she cannot so readily construe herself, and this in order to convince you, did you not already know my qualifications, how well qualified I am for the Christian office to which I commend myself. I will, in the first place, put her in mind of the common course of things in this sublunary world, in which joy, and sorrow, and joy, succeed one another by turns, in order to convince her that her griefs have been but according to that common course of things, gaudia post luctus veniunt, post gaudia luctus. Secondly, I will remind her of her own notable description of sorrow, when she was once called upon to distinguish wherein sorrow, grief, and melancholy differed from each other, which she did impromptu by their effects in a truly admirable manner, to the high satisfaction of every one. I myself could not, by study, have distinguished better, nor more concisely. Sorrow, said she, wears, grief tears, but melancholy soothes. My inference to her shall be, that since a happy reconciliation will take place, grief will be banished, sorrow dismissed, and only sweet melancholy remain to soothe and indulge her contrite heart, and show to all the world the penitent sense she hath of her great error. Thirdly, that her joys, when restored to health and favour, will be the greater, the deeper her griefs were. Joy, let me here observe, my dear Sir, by way of note, is not absolutely inconsistent with melancholy, a soft, gentle joy, not a rapid, not a rampant joy, however, but such a joy as shall lift her temporarily out of her soothing melancholy, and then let her down gently into it again, for melancholy, to be sure, her reflection will generally make to be her state. Gaudia, quae multo parta labore placent. Fourthly, that having really been guilty of a great error, she should not take impatiently the correction and anger with which she hath been treated. Leniter ex merito quicquid patiare ferundum est. Fifthly, that virtue must be established by patience, as saith Prudentius, haec virtus vidua est, quam non patientia firmat. Sixthly, that in the words of Horace she may expect better times than of late she had reason to look for. Grata superveniet, quae non sperabitur hora. Seventhly, that she is really now in a way to be happy, since, according to Ovid, she can count up all her woe. Felix qui patitur quae numerare potest. And those comforting lines, Esque serena dies post longos gratior imbres, et post triste malum gratior ipsa salus. Eighthly, that in the words of Mantuan, her parents and uncles could not help loving her all the time they were angry at her. Aqua tamen mens est, et amica voluntas, sit licet in natos austere parentum. Ninthly, that the ills she hath met with may be turned, by the good use to be made of them, to her everlasting benefit, for that, cum fuit atque ferit, Deus olim parcere quaerit. Tenthly, that she will be able to give a fine lesson, a very fine lesson, to all the young ladies of her acquaintance, of the vanity of being lifted up in prosperity, and the weakness of being cast down in adversity, since no one is so high as to be above being humbled, so low as to need to despair, for which purpose the advice of Ausonius, dum fortuna juvat, caveto tolli, dum fortuna tonat, caveto mergi. I shall tell her that Lucan saith well, when he calleth adversity the element of patience, gaudet patientia duris, that fortunam superat virtus, prudential famam, that while weak souls are crushed by fortune, the brave mind maketh the fickle deity afraid of it. Fortuna fortes metuit, ignavos permit. 11thly, that if she take the advice of Horace, fortiaque adversis apponite pectora rebus, it will delight her hereafter, as Virgil saith, to revoke her past troubles, forsan et haec olim meminisse juvabit. And to the same purpose, Juvenal, speaking of the prating joy of mariners after all their dangers are over, gaudent securi narrare pericula nautae, which suiting the case so well, you'll forgive me, sir, for popping down in English metre, as the translative impulse. Pardon a new word, and yet we scholars are not fond of authenticating new words, came upon me uncalled for. The seaman, safe on shore, with joy doth tell what cruel dangers him at sea befell. With these, sir, and 100 more wise adages, which I have always at my finger's end, will I, when reduced to form and method, entertain Miss, and as she is a well-read, and, I might say, but for this one great error, a wise young lady, I make no doubt but I shall prevail upon her, if not by mine own arguments, by those of wits and capacities that have a congeniality, as I may say, to her own, to take to heart. Nor of the laws of fate complain, since, though it has been cloudy, now it clears up again. Oh, what wisdom is there in these noble classical authors! A wise man will, upon searching into them, always find that they speak his sense of men and things. Hence it is that they so readily occur to my memory on every occasion. Though this may look like vanity, it is too true to be omitted, and I see not why a man may not know these things of himself which everybody seeth and saith of him, who nevertheless perhaps knows not half so much as he in other matters. I know but of one objection, sir, that can lie against my going, and that will arise from your kind care and concern for the safety of my person, in case that fierce and terrible man, the wicked Mr. Lovelace, of whom every one standeth in fear, should come cross me, as he may be resolved to try once more to gain a footing in Mrs. affections. But I will trust in Providence for my safety, while I shall be engaged in a cause so worthy of my function, and the more trust in it, as he is a learned man, as I am told. Strange, too, that so vile a rake, I hope he will never see this, should be a learned man, that is to say, that a learned man may be a sly sinner, and take opportunities as they come in his way, which, however, I do assure you, I never did. I repeat, that as he is a learned man, I shall vest myself, as I may say, in classical armour, beginning meekly with him, for, sir, bravery and meekness are qualities very consistent with each other, and in no person so shiningly exert themselves as in the Christian priesthood, beginning meekly with him, I say, from Ovid. Corpora magnanimo satis est protrasse leoni, so that if I should not be safe behind the shield of mine own prudence, I certainly should be behind the shields of the ever admirable classics, of Horace particularly, who being a rake, and a jovial rake too, himself, must have great weight with all learned rakes. And who knoweth but I may be able to bring even this Goliath in wickedness, although in person but a little David myself, armed with the slings and stones of the ancient sages, to a due sense of his errors? And what a victory would that be! I could here, Sir, pursuing the allegory of David and Goliath, give you some of the stones (hard arguments may be called stones, since they knock down a pertinacious opponent) which I could pelt him with, were he to be wroth with me. And this in order to take from you, Sir, all apprehensions for my life or my bones, but I forbear them till you demand them of me, when I have the honour to attend you in person. And now, my dear Sir, what remaineth, but that having shown you, what yet I believe you did not doubt, how well qualified I am to attend the lady with the olive branch, I beg of you to dispatch me with it out of hand, for if she be so very ill, and if she should not live to receive the grace which to my knowledge all the worthy family design her, how much will that grieve you all! And then, Sir, of what avail will be the eulogies you shall all peradventure join to give to her memory? For as Martial wisely observeth, post cineres gloria sera venit. Then as Ausonius layeth it down with equal propriety, that those favours which are speedily conferred are the most grateful and obliging. And to the same purpose Ovid, gratia ab officio, quod mora tardat abest. And, Sir, whatever you do, let the lady's pardon be as ample and as cheerfully given as she can wish for it, that I may be able to tell her that it hath your hands, your countenances, and your whole hearts with it. For as the Latin verse hath it, and I presume to think I have not weakened its sense by my humble advice, dat bene, dat multum, qui dat cum munere vultum. And now, Sir, when I survey this long letter, albeit I see it enamelled as a beautiful meadow is enamelled by the spring or summer flowers, very glorious to behold, I begin to be afraid that I may have tired you, and the more likely as I have written without that method or order which I think constituteth the beauty of good writing, which method or order, nevertheless, may be the better excused in a familiar epistle, as this may be called, you pardoning, Sir, the familiarity of the word, but yet not altogether here, I must needs own, because this is a letter, and not a letter, as I may say, but a kind of short and pithy discourse, touching upon various and sundry topics, every one of which might be a fit theme to enlarge upon of volumes. If this epistolary discourse, then let me call it, should be pleasing to you, as I am inclined to think it will, because of the sentiments and aphorisms of the wisest of the ancients, which glitter through it like so many dazzling sunbeams, I will at my leisure work it up into a methodical discourse, and perhaps may one day print it, with a dedication to my honoured patron, if, Sir, I have your leave, singly at first, but not till I have thrown out anonymously 2 or 3 smaller things, by the success of which I shall have made myself of some account in the commonwealth of letters, and afterwards in my works. Not for the vanity of the thing, however, I will say, but for the use it may be of to the public. For, as one well observeth, though glory always followeth virtue, yet it should be considered only as its shadow. And here, by way of note, permit me to say that no sermon I ever compose cost me half the pains that this letter hath done. But I knew your great appetite after, as well as admiration of, the ancient wisdom, which you so justly prefer to the modern. And indeed I join with you to think that the modern is only borrowed, as the moon doth its light from the sun, at least that we excel them in nothing, and that our best cogitations may be found, generally speaking, more elegantly dressed and expressed by them. Contemnit laudem virtus, licet usque sequatur, gloria virtutem corpus ut umbra suum. A very pretty saying, and worthy of all men's admiration. And now, most worthy Sir, my very good friend and patron, referring the whole to yours, and to your 2 brothers, and to young Mr. Harlowe's consideration, and to the wise consideration of good Madam Harlowe, and her excellent daughter Miss Arabella Harlowe, I take the liberty to subscribe myself what I truly am, and ever shall delight to be, in all cases, and at all times, your and their most ready and obedient, as well as faithful servant, Elias Brand. End of Letter 66.
Letter 67 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain.
For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or The History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 67. Mr. Lovelace to John Belford, Esquire. Wednesday morning, September 6th. And is she somewhat better? Blessings upon thee without number or measure. Let her still be better and better. Tell me so at least, if she be not so. For thou knowest not what a joy that poor temporary reprieve, that she will hold out yet a day or two, gave me. But who told this hard-hearted and death-pronouncing doctor that she will hold it no longer? By what warrant says he this? What presumption in these parading solemn fellows of a college, which will be my contempt to the latest hour of my life, if this brother of it, eminent as he is deemed to be, cannot work an ordinary miracle in her favour, or rather in mine? Let me tell thee, Belford, that already he deserves the utmost contempt for suffering this charming clock to run down so low. What must be his art, if it could not wind it up in a quarter of the time he has attended her, when, at his first visits, the springs and wheels of life and motion were so good, that they seemed only to want common care and oiling? I am obliged to you for endeavouring to engage her to see me. 'Twas acting like a friend. If she had vouchsafed me that favour, she should have seen at her feet the most abject adorer that ever kneeled to justly offended beauty. What she bid you, and what she forbid you, to tell me, the latter for tender considerations, that she forgives me, and that, could she have made me a good man, she would have made me a happy one, that she even loved me, at such a moment to own that she once loved me, never before loved any man, that she prays for me, that her last tear should be shed for me, could she by it save a soul doomed without her to perdition. O Belford, Belford, I cannot bear it! What a dog, what a devil have I been to a goodness so superlative? Why does she not inveigh against me? Why does she not execrate me? O the triumphant subduer! Ever above me, and now to leave me so infinitely below her! Marry and repair at any time, this wretch that I was my plea to myself, to give her a lowering sensibility, to bring her down from among the stars which her beamy head was surrounded by, that my wife, so greatly above me, might not despise me. This was one of my reptile motives, owing to my more reptile envy, and to my consciousness of inferiority to her. Yet she, from step to step, from distress to distress, to maintain her superiority, and like the sun to break out upon me with the greater refulgence for the clouds that I had contrived to cast about her. And now to escape me thus! No power left me to repair her wrongs, no alleviation to my self-reproach, no dividing of blame with her. Tell her, O tell her, Belford, that her prayers and wishes, her superlatively generous prayers and wishes, shall not be vain, that I can and do repent, and long have repented. Tell her of my frequent deep remorses. It was impossible that such remorses should not at last produce effectual remorse. Yet she must not leave me. She must live, if she would wish to have my contrition perfect. For what can despair produce? I will do every thing you would have me do, in the return of your letters. You have infinitely obliged me by this last, and by pressing for an admission for me, though it succeeded not. Once more, how could I be such a villain to so divine a creature, yet love her all the time as never man loved woman? Curse upon my contriving genius! Curse upon my intriguing head, and upon my seconding heart! To sport with the fame, with the honour, with the life of such an angel of a woman! O my damned incredulity! That, believing her to be a woman, I must hope to find her a woman! On my incredulity, that there could be such virtue, virtue for virtue's sake, in the sex, founded I my hope of succeeding with her. But say not, Jack, that she must leave us yet. If she recover, and if I can but re-obtain her favour, then indeed will life be life to me. The world never saw such an husband as I will make. I will have no will but hers. She shall conduct me in all my steps. She shall open and direct my prospects, and turn every motion of my heart as she pleases. You tell me in your letter, that at 11 o'clock she had sweet rest, and my servant acquaints me from Mrs. Smith that she has had a good night. What hopes does this fill me with? I have given the fellow 5 guineas for his good news, to be divided between him and his fellow servant. Dear, dear Jack, confirm this to me in thy next. For heaven's sake do. Tell the doctor I'll make a present of 1,000 guineas, if he recover her. Ask if a consultation then be necessary. Adieu, dear Belford. Confirm, I beseech thee, the hopes that now, with sovereign gladness, have taken possession of a heart that, next to hers, is thine. End of Letter 67. Letter 68 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 68. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esquire, Wednesday morning, 8 o'clock, 6 September. Your servant arrived here before I was stirring. I sent him to Smith's to inquire how the lady was, and ordered him to call upon me when he came back. I was pleased to hear she had tolerable rest. As soon as I had dispatched him with the letter I had written overnight, I went to attend her. I found her up and dressed in a white satin nightgown, ever elegant, but now more so than I had seen her for a week past. Her aspect serenely cheerful. She mentioned the increased dimness of her eyes, and the tremor which had invaded her limbs. If this be dying, said she, there is nothing at all shocking in it. My body hardly sensible of pain. My mind at ease, my intellects clear and perfect as ever. What a good and gracious God have I! For this is what I always prayed for. I told her it was not so serene with you. There is not the same reason for it, replied she. 'Tis a choice comfort, Mr. Belford, at the winding up of our short story, to be able to say, I have rather suffered injuries myself, than offered them to others. I bless God, though I have been unhappy, as the world deems it, and once I thought more so than at present I think I ought to have done, since my calamities were to work out for me my everlasting happiness, yet have I not wilfully made any one creature so. I have no reason to grieve for any thing but for the sorrow I have given my friends. But pray, Mr. Belford, remember me in the best manner to my cousin Morden, and desire him to comfort them, and to tell them that all would have been the same, had they accepted of my true penitence, as I wish and as I trust the Almighty has done. I was called down. It was to Harry, who was just returned from Miss Howe's, to whom he carried the lady's letter. The stupid fellow being bid to make haste with it, and return as soon as possible, stayed not until Miss Howe had it, she being at the distance of 5 minutes, although Mrs. Howe would have had him stay, and sent a man and horse purposely with it to her daughter. Wednesday morning, 10 o'clock. The poor lady is just recovered from a fainting fit, which has left her at death's door. Her late tranquillity and freedom from pain seem but a lightening, as Mrs. Lovick and Mrs. Smith call it. By my faith, Lovelace, I had rather part with all the friends I have in the world, than with this lady. I never knew what a virtuous, a holy friendship, as I may call mine to her, was before. But to be so new to it, and to be obliged to forego it so soon, what an affliction! Yet, thank Heaven, I lose her not by my own fault. But 'twould be barbarous not to spare thee now. She has sent for the divine who visited her before, to pray with her. End of Letter 68. Letter 69 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 69. Mr. Lovelace to John Belford, Esquire, Kensington, Wednesday noon. Like Aesop's traveller, thou blowest hot and cold, life and death, in the same breath, with a view, no doubt, to distract me. How familiarly dost thou use the words dying, dimness, tremor! Never did any mortal ring so many changes on so few bells. Thy true father, I dare swear, was a butcher or an undertaker, by the delight thou seemest to take in scenes of death and horror. Thy barbarous reflection, that thou losest her not by thy own fault, is never to be forgiven. Thou hast but one way to atone for the torments thou hast given me, and that is by sending me word that she is better and will recover. Whether it be true or not, let me be told so, and I will go abroad rejoicing and believing it, and my wishes and imagination shall make out all the rest. If she live but 1 year, that I may acquit myself to myself, no matter for the world, that her death is not owing to me, I will compound for the rest. Will neither vows nor prayers save her? I never prayed in my life, put all the years of it together, as I have done for this fortnight past, and I have most sincerely repented of all my baseness to her, and will nothing do. But after all, if she recovers not, this reflection must be my comfort, and it is truth, that her departure will be owing rather to wilfulness, to downright female wilfulness, than to any other cause. It is difficult for people, who pursue the dictates of a violent resentment, to stop where first they design to stop. I have the charity to believe, that even James and Arabella Harlowe, at first, intended no more by the confederacy they formed against this their angel sister, than to disgrace and keep her down, lest, sordid wretches, their uncles should follow the example their grandfather had set, to their detriment. So this lady, as I suppose, intended only at first to vex and plague me, and finding she could do it to purpose, her desire of revenge insensibly became stronger in her than the desire of life, and now she is willing to die, as an event which she thinks will cut my heartstrings asunder, and still, the more to be revenged, puts on the Christian, and forgives me. But I'll have none of her forgiveness. My own heart tells me I do not deserve it, and I cannot bear it. And what is it but a mere verbal forgiveness, as ostentatiously as cruelly given with a view to magnify herself and wound me deeper? A little, dear, specious... But let me stop, lest I blaspheme. Reading over the above, I am ashamed of my ramblings. But what wouldst have me do? Seest thou not that I am but seeking to run out of myself, in hope to lose myself, yet that I am unable to do either? If ever thou lovest but half so fervently as I love, but of that thy heavy soul is not capable. Send me word by the next, I conjure thee, in the names of all her kindred saints and angels, that she is living and likely to live. If thou sendest ill news, thou wilt be answerable for the consequences, whether it be fatal to the messenger, or to thy Lovelace. End of Letter 69. Letter 70 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 70. Mr. Belford to Robert Lovelace, Esq., Wednesday, 11 o'clock. Dr. H. has just been here. He tarried with me till the minister had done praying by the lady, and then we were both admitted. Mr. Goddard, who came while the doctor and the clergyman were with her, went away with them when they went. They took a solemn and everlasting leave of her, as I have no scruple to say, blessing her and being blessed by her, and wishing, when it came to be their lot, for an exit as happy as hers is likely to be. She had again earnestly requested of the doctor his opinion, how long it was now probable that she could continue, and he told her that he apprehended she would hardly see to-morrow night. She said she should number the hours with greater pleasure than ever she numbered any in her life on the most joyful occasion. How unlike poor Belton's last hours hers! See the infinite differences in the effects, on the same awful and affecting occasion, between a good and a bad conscience. This moment a man is come from Miss Howe with a letter. Perhaps I shall be able to send you the contents. She endeavoured several times with earnestness, but in vain, to read the letter of her dear friend. The writing, she said, was too fine for her grosser sight, and the lines staggered under her eye. And indeed she trembled so, she could not hold the paper, and at last desired Mrs. Lovick to read it to her, the messenger waiting for an answer. Thou wilt see in Miss Howe's letter how different the expression of the same impatience and passionate love is, when dictated by the gentler mind of a woman, from that which results from a mind so boisterous and knotty as thine. For Mrs. Lovick will transcribe it, and I shall send it, to be read in this place, if thou wilt. Miss Howe to Miss Clarissa Harlowe, Tuesday, September 5th. O my dearest friend, what will become of your poor Anna Howe? I see by your writing, as well as read by your own account, which, were you not very, very ill, you would have touched more tenderly, how it is with you. Why have I thus long delayed to attend you? Could I think that the comfortings of a faithful friend were as nothing to a gentle mind in distress, that I could be prevailed upon to forbear visiting you so much as once in all this time? I, as well as every body else, to desert and abandon my dear creature to strangers! What will become of you, if you be as bad as my apprehensions make you? I will set out this moment, little as the encouragement is that you give me to do so. My mother is willing I should. Why, oh why was she not before willing? Yet she persuades me too, lest I should be fatally affected were I to find my fears too well justified, to wait the return of this messenger, who rides our swiftest horse. God speed him with good news to me. One line from your hand by him. Send me but one line to bid me attend you. I will set out the moment, the very moment I receive it. I am now actually ready to do so, and if you love me, as I love you, the sight of me will revive you to my hopes. But why, when I think this, did I not go up sooner? Blessed Heaven! Deny not to my prayers, my friend, my admonisher, my adviser, at a time so critical to myself. But methinks your style and sentiments are too well connected, too full of life and vigour, to give cause for so much despair as thy staggering pen seems to forebode. I am sorry I was not at home. I must add thus much, though the servant is ready mounted at the door, when Mr. Belford's servant came with your affecting letter. I was at Miss Lloyd's. My mamma sent it to me, and I came home that instant. But he was gone. He would not stay, it seems. Yet I wanted to ask him 100,000 questions. But why delay I thus my messenger? I have a multitude of things to say to you, to advise with you about. You shall direct me in every thing. I will obey the holding up of your finger. But, if you leave me, what is this world, or any thing in it, to your Anna Howe? The effect this letter had on the lady, who is so near the end which the fair writer so much apprehends and deplores, obliged Mrs. Lovick to make many breaks in reading it, and many changes of voice. This is a friend, said the divine lady, taking the letter in her hand and kissing it, worth wishing to live for. O my dear Anna Howe, how uninterruptedly sweet and noble has been our friendship! But we shall one day meet, and this hope must comfort us both, never to part again. Then, divested of the shades of body, shall be all light and all mind. Then how unalloyed, how perfect will be our friendship! Our love then will have one and the same adorable object, and we shall enjoy it and each other to all eternity. She said, her dear friend was so earnest for a line or two that she fain would write if she could, and she tried, but to no purpose. She could dictate, however, she believed, and desired Mrs. Lovick would take pen and paper, which she did, and then she dictated to her. I would have withdrawn, but at her desire stayed. She wondered a good deal at first. She took notice that she did. And when she got into a little train, not pleasing herself, she apologized to Mrs. Lovick for making her begin again and again, and said that the third time should go, let it be as it would. She dictated the farewell part without hesitation, and when she came to blessing and subscription, she took the pen, and dropping on her knees, supported by Mrs. Lovick, wrote the conclusion. But Mrs. Lovick was forced to guide her hand. You will find the sense surprisingly entire, her weakness considered. I made the messenger wait while I transcribed it. I have endeavoured to imitate the subscriptive part, and in the letter made pauses where, to the best of my remembrance, she paused. In nothing that relates to this admirable lady can I be too minute. Wednesday, near 3 o'clock. My dearest Miss Howe, you must not be surprised, nor grieved, that Mrs. Lovick writes for me. Although I cannot obey you and write with my pen, yet my heart writes by hers. Accept it so. It is the nearest to obedience I can. And now, what ought I to say? What can I say? But why should not you know the truth, since soon you must, very soon? Know then, and let your tears be those, if of pity, of joyful pity, for I permit you to shed a few, to embalm, as I may say, a fallen blossom. Know then, that the good doctor, and the pious clergyman, and the worthy apothecary, have just now, with joint benedictions, taken their last leave of me, and the former bids me hope. Do, my dearest, let me say, hope. Hope for my enlargement before to-morrow's sunset. Adieu, therefore, my dearest friend. Be this your consolation, as it is mine, that in God's good time we shall meet in a blessed eternity, never more to part. Once more, then, adieu, and be happy, which a generous nature cannot be, unless, to its power, it makes others so too. God for ever bless you. Praise, dropped on my bended knees, although supported upon them, your obliged, grateful, affectionate, Clarissa Harlowe. When I had transcribed and sealed this letter by her direction, I gave it to the messenger myself, who told me that Miss Howe waited for nothing but his return to set out for London. Thy servant is just come, so I will close here. Thou art a merciless master. These two fellows are battered to death by thee, to use a female word. And all female words, though we are not sure of their derivation, have very significant meanings. I believe in their hearts they wish the angel in the heaven that is ready to receive her, and thee at the proper place, that there might be an end of their flurries. Another word of the same gender. What a letter hast thou sent me, poor Lovelace, is all the answer I will return. 5 o'clock. Colonel Morden is this moment arrived. End of Letter 70. Letter 71 of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Volume 8, by Samuel Richardson. Letter 71. Mr. Belford, in continuation, 8 in the evening. I had but just time in my former to tell you that Colonel Morden was arrived. He was on horseback, attended by 2 servants, and alighted at the door just as the clock struck 5. Mrs. Smith was then below in her back shop, weeping, her husband with her, who was as much affected as she. Mrs. Lovick having left them a little before, in tears likewise; for they had been bemoaning one another, joining in opinion that the admirable lady would not live the night over. She had told them it was her opinion too, from some numbnesses, which she called the forerunners of death, and from an increased inclination to doze. The Colonel, as Mrs. Smith told me afterwards, asked with great impatience, the moment he alighted, how Miss Harlowe was. She answered, alive; but she feared, drawing on a pace. Good God! said he, with his hands and eyes lifted up, can I see her? My name is Morden. I have the honour to be nearly related to her. Step up, pray, and let her know she is sensible, I hope, that I am here. Who is with her? Nobody but her nurse, and Mrs. Lovick, a widow gentlewoman, who is as careful of her as if she were her mother. And more careful too, interrupted he, or she is not careful at all. Except a gentleman be with her, one Mr. Belford, continued Mrs. Smith, who has been the best friend she has had. If Mr. Belford be with her, surely I may. But pray step up, and let Mr. Belford know that I shall take it for a favour to speak with him first. Mrs. Smith came up to me in my new apartment. I had but just dispatched your servant, and was asking her nurse if I might be again admitted, who answered, that she was dozing in the elbow chair, having refused to lie down, saying she should soon, she hoped, lie down for good. The Colonel, who is really a fine gentleman, received me with great politeness. After the first compliments, my kinswoman, sir, said he, is more obliged to you than to any of her own family. For my part, I have been endeavouring to move so many rocks in her favour, and little thinking the dear creature so very bad, have neglected to attend her, as I ought to have done the moment I arrived, and would, had I known how ill she was, and what a task I should have had with the family. But, sir, your friend has been excessively to blame, and you being so intimately his friend, has made her fare the worse for your civilities to her. But are there no hopes of her recovery? The doctors have left her, with the melancholy declaration that there are none. Has she had good attendance, sir? A skilful physician? I hear these good folks have been very civil and obliging to her. Who could be otherwise? Said Mrs. Smith, weeping. She is the sweetest lady in the world. The character, said the Colonel, lifting up his eyes and one hand, that she has from every living creature. Good God! How could your accursed friend? And how could her cruel parents? Interrupted I. We may as easily account for him as for them. Too true, returned me. The vileness of the profligates of our sex considered, whenever they can get any of the other into their power. I satisfied him about the care that has been taken of her, and told him of the friendly and even paternal attendance she had had from Dr. H. and Mr. Goddard. He was impatient to attend her, having not seen her, as he said, since she was 12 years old, and that then she gave promises of being one of the finest women in England. She was so, replied I, a very few months ago, and though emaciated, she will appear to you to have confirmed those promises; for her features are so regular and exact, her proportions so fine, and her manners so inimitably graceful, that, were she only skin and bone, she must be a beauty. Mrs. Smith, at his request, stept up, and brought us down word that Mrs. Lovick and her nurse were with her, and that she was in so sound a sleep, leaning upon the former in her elbow-chair, that she had neither heard her enter the room nor go out. The Colonel begged, if not improper, that he might see her, though sleeping. He said that his impatience would not let him stay till she awaked, yet he would not have her disturbed, and should be glad to contemplate her sweet features when she saw not him, and asked if she thought he could not go in and come out without disturbing her. She believed he might, she answered, for her chair's back was towards the door. He said he would take care to withdraw if she awoke, that his sudden appearance might not surprise her. Mrs. Smith, stepping up before us, bid Mrs. Lovick and nurse not stir when we entered, and then we went up softly together. We beheld the lady in a charming attitude, dressed, as I told you before, in her virgin white. She was sitting in her elbow-chair, Mrs. Lovick close by her, in another chair, with her left arm round her neck, supporting it, as it were, for it seems the lady had bid her do so, saying she had been a mother to her, and she would delight herself in thinking she was in her mamma's arms, for she found herself drowsy. Perhaps, she said, for the last time she should be so. One faded cheek rested upon the good woman's bosom, the kindly warmth of which had overspread it with a faint but charming flush. The other, paler and hollow, as if already iced over by death. Her hands white as the lily, with her meandering veins more transparently blue than ever I had seen even hers. Veins so soon, alas, to be choked up by the congealment of that purple stream, which already so languidly creeps rather than flows through them. Her hands hanging lifelessly, one before her, the other grasped by the right hand of the kind widow, whose tears bedewed the sweet face which her motherly bosom supported, though unfelt by the fair sleeper, and either insensibly to the good woman, or what she would not disturb her to wipe off, or to change her posture. Her aspect was sweetly calm and serene, and though she started now and then, yet her sleep seemed easy. Her breath indeed short and quick, but tolerably free, and not like that of a dying person. In this heart-moving attitude she appeared to us when we approached her, and came to have her lovely face before us. The Colonel, sighing often, gazed upon her with his arms folded, and with the most profound and affectionate attention, till at last, on her starting and fetching her breath with greater difficulty than before, he retired to a screen that was drawn before her house, as she calls it, which, as I have heretofore observed, stands under one of the windows. This screen was placed there the time she found herself obliged to take to her chamber, and in the depth of our concern, and the fulness of other discourse at our first interview, I had forgotten to apprize the Colonel of what he would probably see. Retiring thither, he drew out his handkerchief, and, overwhelmed with grief, seemed unable to speak. But on casting his eye behind the screen, he soon broke silence; for, struck with the shape of the coffin, he lifted up a purplish-coloured cloth that was spread over it, and starting back, "Good God!" said he, "what's here?" Mrs. Smith, standing next him, "Why," said he, with great emotion, "is my cousin suffered to indulge her sad reflections with such an object before her?" "Alas, sir," replied the good woman, "who should controul her? We are all strangers about her in a manner, and yet we have expostulated with her upon this sad occasion." "I ought," said I, stepping softly up to him, the lady again falling into a doze, "to have apprized you of this. I was here when it was brought in, and never was so shocked in my life. But she had none of her friends about her, and no reason to hope for any of them to come near her; and assured she should not recover, she was resolved to leave as little as possible, especially as to what related to her person, to her executor. But it is not a shocking object to her, though it be to every body else." "Curse upon the hard-heartedness of those," said he, "who occasioned her to make so sad a provision for herself. What must her reflections have been all the time she was thinking of it, and giving orders about it? And what must they be every time she turns her head towards it? These uncommon geniuses! But indeed she should have been controlled in it, had I been here." The lady fetched a profound sigh, and, starting, it broke off our talk; and the Colonel then withdrew further behind the screen, that his sudden appearance might not surprise her. "Where am I?" said she. "How drowsy I am! How long have I dozed!" "Don't go, sir," for I was retiring. "I am very stupid, and shall be more and more so, I suppose." She then offered to raise herself; but being ready to faint through weakness, was forced to sit down again, reclining her head on her chair back. And after a few moments, "I believe now, my good friend," said she, "all your kind trouble will soon be over. I have slept, but am not refreshed, and my fingers' ends seem numbed, have no feeling," holding them up. "'Tis time to send the letter to my good Norton. Shall I, Madam, send my servant post with it?" "Oh, no, Sir, I thank you. It will reach the dear woman too soon, as she will think, by the post." I told her this was not post day. "Is it Wednesday still?" said she. "Bless me! I know not how the time goes. But very tediously 'tis plain. And now I think I must soon take to my bed. All will be most conveniently, and with least trouble, over there. Will it not, Mrs. Lovick? I think, Sir, turning to me, I have left nothing to these last incapacitating hours. Nothing either to say or to do. I bless God I have not. If I had, how unhappy should I be! Can you, Sir, remind me of any thing necessary to be done or said to make your office easy? If, Madam, your cousin Morden should come, you would be glad to see him, I presume. I am too weak to wish to see my cousin now. It would but discompose me, and him too. Yet, if he come while I can see him, I will see him, were it but to thank him for former favours, and for his present kind intentions to me. Has any body been here from him? He has called, and will be here, Madam, in half an hour: but he feared to surprise you. Nothing can surprise me now, except my mamma were to favour me with her last blessing in person. That would be a welcome surprise to me, even yet. But did my cousin come purposely to town to see me? Yes, Madam. I took the liberty to let him know by a line last Monday how ill you were. You are very kind, Sir. I am, and have been, greatly obliged to you. But I think I shall be pained to see him now, because he will be concerned to see me. And yet, as I am not so ill as I shall presently be, the sooner he comes the better. But if he come, what shall I do about the screen? He will chide me, very probably, and I cannot bear chiding now. Perhaps, leaning upon Mrs. Lovick and Mrs. Smith, I can walk into the next apartment to receive him. She motioned to rise, but was ready to faint again, and forced to sit still. The Colonel was in a perfect agitation behind the screen to hear this discourse, and twice, unseen by his cousin, was coming from it towards her, but retreated for fear of surprising her too much. I stepped to him, and favoured his retreat, she only saying, "Are you going, Mr. Belford? Are you sent for down? Is my cousin come?" For she heard somebody step softly across the room, and thought it to be me, her hearing being more perfect than her sight. I told her I believed he was, and she said, "We must make the best of it, Mrs. Lovick and Mrs. Smith. I shall otherwise most grievously shock my poor cousin, for he loved me dearly once. Pray give me a few of the doctor's last drops in water, to keep up my spirits for this one interview, and that is all, I believe, that can concern me now. The Colonel, who heard all this, sent in his name, and I, pretending to go down to him, introduced the afflicted gentleman, she having first ordered the screen to be put as close to the window as possible, that he might not see what was behind it, while he, having heard what she had said about it, was determined to take no notice of it. He folded the angel in his arms as she sat, dropping down on one knee; for, supporting herself upon the 2 elbows of the chair, she attempted to rise, but could not. Excuse, my dear cousin, said she, excuse me that I cannot stand up. I did not expect this favour now, but I am glad of this opportunity to thank you for all your generous goodness to me. I never, my best beloved and dearest cousin, said he, with eyes running over, shall forgive myself that I did not attend you sooner. Little did I think you were so ill, nor do any of your friends believe it, if they did. If they did, repeated she, interrupting him, I should have had more compassion from them. I am sure I should. But pray, sir, how did you leave them? Are you reconciled to them? If you are not, I beg, if you love your poor Clarissa, that you will, for every widened difference augments but my fault, since that is the foundation of all. I had been expecting to hear from them in your favour, my dear cousin, said he, for some hours, when this gentleman's letter arrived, which hastened me up. But I have the account of your grandfather's estate to make up with you, and have bills and drafts upon their banker, for the sums due to you, which they desire you may receive, lest you should have occasion for money. And this is such an earnest of an approaching reconciliation, that I dare to answer for all the rest being according to your wishes, if— Ah, sir, interrupted she, with frequent breaks and pauses, I wish this does not rather show that, were I to live, they would have nothing more to say to me. I never had any pride in being independent of them. All my actions, when I might have made myself more independent, show this. But what avail these reflections now? I only beg, sir, that you and this gentleman, to whom I am exceedingly obliged, will adjust those matters according to the will I have written. Mr. Belford will excuse me, but it was in truth more necessity than choice that made me think of giving him the trouble he so kindly accepts. Had I the happiness to see you, my cousin, sooner, or to know that you still honoured me with your regard, I should not have had the assurance to ask this favour of him. But though the friend of Mr. Lovelace, he is a man of honour, and he will make peace rather than break it. And, my dear cousin, let me beg of you, while I have nearer relations than my cousin Morden, dear as you are, and always were to me, you have no title to avenge my wrongs upon him who has been the occasion of them. But I wrote to you my mind on this subject, and my reasons, and I hope I need not further urge them. I must do Mr. Lovelace so much justice, answered he, wiping his eyes, as to witness how sincerely he repents him of his ungrateful baseness to you, and how ready he is to make you all the amends in his power. He owns his wickedness and your merit. If he did not, I could not pass it over, though you have nearer relations. For, my dear cousin, did not your grandfather leave me in trust for you? And should I think myself concerned for your fortune, and not for your honour? But since he is so desirous to do you justice, I have the less to say, and you may make yourself entirely easy on that account. I thank you, sir, said she. All is now as I wished, but I am very faint, very weak. I am sorry I cannot hold up, that I cannot better deserve the honour of this visit, but it will not be. And saying this, she sunk down in her chair, and was silent. Hereupon we both withdrew, leaving word that we would be at the Bedford Head, if anything extraordinary happened. We bespoke a little repast, having neither of us dined, and while it was getting ready, you may guess at the subject of our discourse. Both joined in lamentation for the lady's desperate state, admired her manifold excellencies, severely condemned you and her friends. Yet, to bring him into better opinion of you, I read to him some passages from your last letters, which showed your concern for the wrongs you had done her, and your deep remorse, and he said it was a dreadful thing to labour under the sense of a guilt so irredeemable. We procured Mr. Goddard, Dr. H. not being at home, once more to visit her, and to call upon us in his return. He was so good as to do so, but he tarried with her not 5 minutes, and told us that she was drawing on apace, that he feared she would not live till morning, and that she wished to see Colonel Morden directly. The Colonel made excuses where none were needed, and though our little refection was just brought in, he went away immediately. I could not touch a morsel, and took pen and ink to amuse myself, and oblige you, knowing how impatient you would be for a few lines. For, from what I have recited, you see it was impossible I could withdraw to write, when your servant came at 1/2 hour after 5, or have an opportunity for it till now, and this is accidental. And yet your poor fellow was afraid to go away with the verbal message I sent, importing, as no doubt he told you, that the Colonel was with us, the lady excessively ill, and that I could not stir to write a line. 10 o'clock. The Colonel sent to me afterwards, to tell me that the lady having been in convulsions, he was so much disordered that he could not possibly attend me. I have sent every 1/2 hour to know how she does. and just now I have the pleasure to hear that her convulsions have left her, and that she is gone to rest in a much quieter way than could be expected. Her poor cousin is very much indisposed, yet will not stir out of the house while she is in such a way, but intends to lie down on a couch, having refused any other accommodation. End of Letter 71. End of Clarissa Harlowe, or the History of a Young Lady, Vol. 8, by Samuel Richardson.